Hey everyone, this is Rohan. Just give me a sec. Let me share my screen. Is my screen visible? Um, a quick yes in the chat would be super helpful. Yeah, I can see the yeses. You folks can hear me and you folks can see me. Thank you so much for turning up. My name is Rohan, and a very warm welcome to Headstart 2026, brought to you by Kickstart. We have a jam-packed session lined up ahead of us. We have two sessions today. The first session would be around breaking into software roles, which is around US, AI, software engineering, hiring landscape, FAANG opportunities, role expectations, real interviews, insights. And then we have session two, which is about how to crack data and ML rules, which will mostly incorporate data engineering, data science, MLE pathways, and interview signals, visa focused upskilling, and a lot more. The core thing that we are really excited about is the speed mock interviews that we have lined up for you folks. It's a really fun segment. Stay tuned. Both the sessions will have those. And just to give you a very quick heads up, what we intend to do over there is we'll quickly show you a question, we'll ask you somebody to take a stab at it live, and then show you the right way to do it. Day two, which is tomorrow, will be focused on management. And then day two, second session will be predominantly around AMA, where all the FANG hiring managers, especially the instructors or the speakers for these three sessions, would be present. Um, in terms of Head Start, I told you like the session and the lined up for the next 2 days. In terms of free resources, all of you will get course or domain specific playbook, and then there's a job prep toolkit which you get in your emails. Very quickly coming to what are the goals and the outcomes that we expect out of Head Start. Um, you only want to can you? We'll get share the calendar invites, folks. Just coming back to this, in terms of the goals and outcomes, we expect folks who attend this to get clarity on career paths and role expectations. What sort of interview intelligence is expected across all domains? What should the market readiness in US hiring landscape look like? AI fluency as in AI skills required for each domain or role specific, domain specific AI skills that are expected in the market as of today. And then specifically for there's a small segment that we have kept for a core audience, which is around H1B and US career navigation. How do you stay relevant? How do you stay abreast with the current trends? Um, Before I go further, I'll set the agenda. Let me quickly run a poll. This poll will help us understand who are the folks who have tuned in. It would be great if you could address this. There are four questions predominantly. The question one is what best describes your domain slash role. Second is what is your goal for attending this event? Then what type of upskilling you think would help you right now? And lastly, it's about if you're looking to get some personalized consultation about your offering, about our offerings, and just about your career goals as well. We'd be happy to assist you. Please respond to this poll. It will help us understand who are the folks who have tuned in. How can we cater our offerings better to them? Coming to the agenda for today, it's a software engineering session which will be led by Sanjeev. First part of the session is where we'll talk to you about the tech job landscape and the market opportunities. Then, after once we've understood what the landscape is looking like, what are the core skills required to crack those rules? Once we understood what the core domain specific skills, we'll talk about the AI specific skills relevant for every engineer today. Then we'll cover the interview processes across tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 companies. Then comes the section I'm most excited about, the live speed mock interviews for software engineers. And then we'll wrap it up with the first session for today with H1B visa myths versus reality. Sanjeev, if you're here, would love to have you on camera. I'll stop sharing my screen and then you could take it further.
Awesome. Thanks, Rohan. Can you confirm you can see me,
We can see you.
hear me, and let me share my screen 1 second. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this session. My name is Sanjeev Kazi. I've been with IK as an instructor mock interviewer for I think more than 5 years now. And in terms of my work experience, I have spent more than 10 years total at Microsoft. I was there twice, and then 6 years at Expedia, a bunch of years at Intel, different companies, different domains. And so I'm excited to be here and share my thoughts here with you all. Awesome. So like Rohan said, we are going to talk a little bit about software engineering, interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess let me go here. So this is kind of lays out the various sections at a high level. So also want to say I'll be sharing my thoughts. There's no like uh necessarily right or wrong answers. A lot of this, what you build opinion over time based on what you're seeing, right? So at some point, if anybody else wants to share some of their thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay. All right, so let's get started. And the first thing I guess we wanted to address here is there's a lot of concern, recently about the tech space, the tech job market, and such. And if you look at the numbers as you see on this slide, there is going to be, in spite of all that's happening, there still is tech is still around and it's still going to be around for as long as we can see, right, in the future. And there is growth in the jobs, and there is more focus on sure, maybe the AI has some more focus recently, but that's still in the tech domain. And then the software engineering jobs and such, they're not going away in spite of what we are seeing in the market. It's sometimes it's hard to see the actual data because, based on what gets more attention in the news, and that kind of sways the opinion of people. But, if you start looking at the data, that's where you actually get a better sense. This is talking about some surveys that, Deloitte has done. And so a lot of these companies are still talking about recruiting challenges. Okay. And especially like in the AI field, machine learning, cloud technologies, and others, right? There's still gaps. So it's not like any of these are going away or have gone away. That's not happening. So that's something we kind of wanted to just share some data here in the beginning, just to allay concerns about people. Uh, and give me 1 second. I think, Rohan, I'm not in the presenter mode here.
No worries.
Uh,
While you're getting to presentation mode, Sanjeev, I think I missed making one announcement. Let me just do that. Folks, I'll be sharing some links about communities in the chat. Feel free to join those. You'll get all the resources there if you have missed out on any. I'll be sharing them soon. Sorry, Sanjeev. Just want to take this opportunity for interrupt.
oh, yeah, no problem. So let's see. I think now I am. Screen is still being shared. Awesome. All right. So, okay. So next, with that, backdrop, let's talk about some of the skills that are required to get into these roles. And we are talking about here back end, front end, full stack, test roles and such. Um, if you look at, for example, let's start with the back end engineering roles. The kind of skills that you would need are, like distributed systems, as we know. That's kind of a given here, and things like your knowledge and experience with microservices, where you can talk about scalability, trade-offs, and the various distributed system patterns, such as this mentions a couple of things here. It mentions load balancing communication patterns, but these are obviously the lists that you see here are not exhaustive. That's just some examples, but um, there is you can expect to be interviewed on like database storage, like SQL, ACID, replication sharding, hotspots, all of these, and then of course on the API side as well. So these are again, these are some representative, bullet points here, not exhaustive, but the point here is that as long as you are comfortable in these technologies, you can expect to be, doing well in the interviews. When I say comfortable in these technologies, I don't necessarily mean that, let's say there's the system design interviews and there's a bunch of these prompts. Obviously, nobody has, there's like, n number of prompts where n is, we know n is greater than 30, right? The design prompts that get asked in interviews. Obviously, we don't have anyone who's built all of those, right? And so when I say you need to have knowledge and experience, I'm not trying to say that you have to have built a lot of these systems. You may have built some, but a lot of this knowledge then comes from reading and blogs and courses like interview Kickstart courses and such, right? And that's once once you uh, go through all of that, then that just improves your uh, fundamental knowledge on these systems, and then the pros and cons and the trade-offs and such. And that's where all of this comes from. And that's true for obviously not just back-end engineering, but any of these domains. And then concurrency, perf optimizations, and cloud infra, et cetera, et cetera. Again, so these are, like I said, not necessarily exhaustive, but these are the kind of skills that you would be, they would be looking for. If we look at full stack engineers now, full stack, of course, so they have knowledge on the front end, they have knowledge on the back end as well. So there's back end engineers, there's full stack engineers, and then there's front end engineers. And as the name suggests, full stack would be working on both back and front. Again, I'm not gonna read through all of these names that I'm sure a lot of these names anyway. But the idea is again, so for full stack engineers, you have to be proficient on a lot of these front end technologies in addition to, of course, back end, right? And also this again, lists some areas that might come up in interviews, or other way to look at it is these are the kind of skills you need to have, or the knowledge that you need to have. Again, you may not have worked on every single thing. So when I say skills, what I mean in general is this is part of your experience and or knowledge which you've picked up based on either working on some maybe academic projects, maybe some people have their own pet projects which are not related to the work that they're doing necessarily, or reading blogs or from courses such as IK and such, right? Um, so front end engineering skills similarly. Um, a lot of these, so of course, these people, they're more familiar with uh, the front end frameworks, maybe less familiar with back end, um, and such. Okay. And then, testing. We mentioned testing here. Of course, testing applies to all roles. Um, from a test perspective, there's two ways to look at it. There is a specifically like a test role as that, but then companies that may or may not necessarily have a specific test role, they will have dev roles, which will be expected to do testing as well. So it is, as we know, a few years ago, there was a shift in the industry where the test roles sometimes in some companies, a lot of the test roles, I'm not going to say necessarily 100%, but a lot of the test roles got absorbed by the dev side. But some of the test roles still do exist in many companies, as we know, right? Um, so, but that's, having a testing mindset is absolutely essential, and even for people who are just working on the dev side. And so this one is talking about the SDET or test engineer roles. And here, um, so there's two ways to look at it. People who are devs, but they're also, of course, testing their code. You can no longer say for a few years now, you can no longer say, hey, I wrote the code and somebody else is going to test it. That doesn't fly. Like I said, for quite a few years now. But then somebody who is actually in this SDET role, um, would have a lot better and deeper understanding of the frameworks and the methodologies, et cetera, et cetera. And that's if that is you, if that's the role that you're applying for, then um, you should expect to have a really good handle um, in these technologies in this domain, right? Because that then is the strong point. Uh, and automation, of course, is key. We are not necessarily talking about manual testing. I think those roles they keep getting smaller and smaller and probably, I don't know, maybe non-existent. So it's all about automation because that's what scales. So let's see, one second. Hey, Rohan, I was just opening my chat window, or if you see any question that I might have missed, just feel
I
free to
will do. I will do. I will do.
thank.
There's just two pieces that are coming in, Sanjeev, a lot is in terms of will the slides be shared? Yes, they will be shared. Try joining our communities. We'll be sending all the resources there. In terms of other piece where you folks haven't received any of the resources, I'll ensure all of you get it and I'll just share it, the link in chat and on the communities as well. Sorry, Sanjeev, I just keep coming in with salesy things, but
Oh no, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you, Rohan. All right. So continuing on, again, this is still an SDET role, so debugging, quality mindset, of course, like I said, if that's your role, then these are key things that you talk about in your or you need to have knowledge on, so you're able to clearly communicate. Um, the last point here says communication collaboration, but this one is specifically talking with respect to SDET. But of course, as we know, communication collaboration is a horizontal signal and a horizontal skill that anybody would need to have. Um, I just want to say one thing here with respect to communication. Um, communication is extremely important because that a lot of times what happens is people are technically sound, but the communication is an issue, and if that happens, then that really makes it really hard. Okay. So, but then, one part of communication is when I say when I mean communication, I do not mean how well somebody speaks, or I don't mean about English being their primary language. That is not what it is, right? Communication is about, are you able to get, are you confident in what you're talking about? Are you talking, are you giving the information in an organized manner, right? So it's about that. It's not about English being your primary language or the accent or necessarily the grammar and although you could say those things help, but it's primarily about um, especially for leadership roles like senior engineers, staff engineers, engineering managers. Are you able to would you be able to communicate um, the information to junior engineers? Would you be able to kind of mentor them? And so that becomes a key signal. So I just kind of wanted to digress on that a little bit, but that applies. It's horizontal across every role, and not just obviously not just SDET. Okay. So let's go on to this next section here with touching upon AI. And as we know, there is, for the last couple of years now, AI has entered the scene, and there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of confusion about AI, even in companies, not just in candidates, but even in companies. There's a lot of confusion about, where this is going, how to effectively make use of it, and such, right? So it is. What I want to say is, it is. Sorry, kind of getting ahead of myself. There's also talk about a lot of reports coming out. Hey, AI is not useful. X amount percentage of companies haven't been able to, use it effectively, monetize it, blah blah blah. Right? I know I'm aware of all that. Right? We've all seen those a lot of such articles. My opinion is AI, and hopefully a lot of you also share that same opinion. AI is here to stay. It isn't going away. It is useful. We, you know, people are seeing the benefits of it. right? Now, when you see these articles about companies are not seeing the benefit, they are talking about at a much higher level. If companies invest millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, how much of a return are they seeing? So they are looking at it from that perspective. But then somebody like me, for example, or probably you too, right? We are looking at it from the perspective of, is it making a change in my day-to-day life? Is it helping me move faster? And the answer for me is yes, right? Certainly is. In my mind, I equate it to, I don't know how many of you played this game, this Mario Kart game or video game, right? It's been around for many years. But AI tools, for me, equates to like in Mario Kart game, when you pick up one of those power things, right? And it helps you move faster, much faster, right? Now, can you put it on auto and then just pick up that thing and just sit back and it'll move for you? No, it doesn't, right? You'll just go crash. So you still need to control it, but it's basically helping you move a lot faster in the video game, right? So I look at AI kind of like that. I can't just let it on auto and say, hey, go do the work and I'm, watching a movie or doing something else. No, I can't do that. But, I still have to pay attention. I still am in control, but it's helping me move really fast, right? So from that perspective, AI is here to stay. And so upskilling is, is a given. It is expected. You, you know, if you're in an interview, should you be AI aware? Absolutely should be. But that doesn't mean that every person is an ML engineer or an AI engineer. That is not what it means, unless, of course, that is your domain, then that's different. But in general, for SWEs, we have to be aware of AI and we have to be fluent with AI, from a usage perspective at the very least, right? And that's what we are trying to say here. And a lot of these, surveys they're showing you, yeah, people uh, are getting AI aware in terms of trainings and such. Some numbers on adoption of AI. Um, you know, uh, Companies investing using AI and average salaries and such. So that's just FYI. Okay. Now, AI, of course, makes its way into all of these domains now. So for DevOps, anomaly detection is something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. And that with respect to monitoring observability, then anomaly detection kind of feeds into that for error rates or any issues that might be going on. So it detects anomalies, which may or may not necessarily show up as errors. If you take out the anomaly detection, for example, um, it may not show up as errors. So this anomaly detection is kind of an early warning system in a sense, right? Where it says, okay, something different is happening, and which eventually might lead into some errors, but this is trying to, catch it at an anomaly level. Um, and then, there is API integration, data engineering, agentic AI. There's a lot of these things going on, right? So it certainly helps to uh, get into the groove, so to speak, and pick up that knowledge again, whether that's through your experience or self-study, or whether it's through joining programs such as this, IK programs. When I say IK, I mean Interview Kickstart. So that those are all your choices, uh, but the end result has to be there. This is where AI is playing into the picture. Similarly, for full stack domain, uh, you know, there's AI all over, as you would expect. And again, I'm not going to drain the slide and go through each one of these bullets. They are more kind of representative, and you're seeing them anyway on the screen. All right. Um, Front end, again, further, um, AI design, UX enhancements, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll keep going. In test domain, AI, forces there still um, for testing, like make building test cases for analysis of code, etc., etc. We had code analysis tools earlier. Now with AI, they are hopefully smarter and such, right? Um, and yeah, so slide is to say that AI is everywhere, even in the test domain or back end or front end and full stack, right? Okay. So we'll keep going and talk a bit about the interview process. This is again, this set of slides is generally talking about at a high level. They're broken down into like tier 1 and tier 2 and such. Oops, sorry. Uh, but at a high level, it is the process is very similar. You start with the recruiter contacts you. Either it's they contact you or you applied or it's a referral. Could be any of those cases. But there's a quick phone screen from the recruiter. They are just doing some basic checks. Is it a real person we are talking to, or do they have the experience they claim to have, et cetera, et cetera. They're just doing that basic checks. Then comes the technical phone screen, which is done by either a hiring manager or another, some engineer in the company. Or it could just be one of those tests where you log on to a site, for example, HackerRank, and then they've given you a question. There's nobody there, no person is there, so it's it could be any of such cases, right? Uh, if there's a person there, then they are looking at how you solve the problem, how you communicate your thoughts, right? Um, and such. So what I want to say there is um, a technical phone screen when when there's a actual person involved, you want to make sure that communication is on, one of the I want to make sure you understand that communication is one of the things they'll be kind of judging you on. A technical phone screen, or for that matter, an actual on-site coding interview, is never only about solving the problem or writing the code. It's never only about that. That's kind of, you can assume that that's a minimum condition, qualifying condition, not as sufficient. I mean, because there is also they're going to look at how you're communicating your thoughts and how you're approaching the problem. That is absolutely important. Now, that part doesn't get addressed if it's like a hacker rank test where there's nobody else there, but eventually they will get to it, right? At some point, you will talk to a human, like for example, on this slide, step 3. If you, if you get to the on-site rounds, that is, humans are obviously involved. So again, communication and such. Okay. The on-site loops will then have um, system design, coding, behavioral. Now, this slide here says 2 to 3 coding rounds and 1 system design. I mean, the numbers, how many coding rounds and how many system designs are not important because that changes from level to level. Like if somebody applying for, say, a staff role, they will likely have 2 system designs instead of 1 system design. And probably, 1 coding or maybe 2 codings, and definitely a behavioral leadership kind of interview. Um, there are no fixed, hard and fast rules. Things change and you change across companies. So, but just the higher you go, the more important your behavioral interview becomes, more important your system design interview becomes. For generally for people who are fresh out of college or maybe even like a couple of years experience, system design usually is not there. Uh, they will have more coding rounds. But as you go up the level, system design will start showing up, and maybe more than 1 system design interviews will show up. But the behavioral, etc., is always there for all the levels pretty much. One thing I want to add about behavioral here is uh, in in my opinion, in my experience, behavioral is the least prepared interview somehow. And that is because people think that the technical interviews are more important. and they spend a lot of time doing that, and they under prepare for behavioral because a lot of times people think, oh, behavioral is, they're going to talk to me about, they're going to ask me about projects I've done. And of course, I know that because I'm the person who's done it, right? True, you are the person who's done your, you know, has your work experience, whatever number of years it is. But in a behavioral interview, keep in mind what comes across and where people, most candidates actually, uh, fail is they're not able to concisely, with appropriate depth and the relevant points, they're not able to summarize that into like a 2-minute answer or a 4-minute answer, whatever the case might be, right? And clearly articulate that. So that's kind of where um, uh, it starts making a difference. The person who's doing the behavioral interview, they've done like hundreds of behavioral interviews, so they are very experienced in that, and they can kind of sense, um, I don't know, sixth sense or whatever, but from experience, right? I mean, you can judge, um, what the other person is saying. So basically, what I'm trying to say is prepare for behavioral interviews. Prepare your stories, your examples, your work examples. Think of the projects you've done. Think of the relevant details. Write them down. Okay, write them down, and this is your cheat sheet. Uh, where you put all your notes and everything, and details of project, the relevant details of projects, right? Because you will get asked about those. And if you have those stories and the details fresh in your mind because you prepared, then obviously your communication is going to come across much better, and you're not going to stumble and not be able to answer when they start digging into details. So, all right, so something to keep in mind. Anyway, so once that happens, the on-site happens, then uh, there's like a hiring committee review, but the step hiring committee review, of course, varies from company to company. There's some companies have a very formal hiring committee. Other companies may not have a formal hiring committee, where in those cases it's more of the debrief that happens, where the people who interviewed the candidate, they have a quick meeting, and they uh, they would have already given their response on whether it's a hire, no hire, strong hire, etc., weak hire. Uh, they will discuss that and then make a final decision. Uh, some some again, this is not an exhaustive list, but some reason why candidates might get rejected. Uh, Technical issues for FAANG company, tier 1 companies, the bar is pretty high. They can afford to keep it high because so many people apply, and s- so when they have a huge choice, they are picky. Okay. Again, I want to mention what I said earlier. In a technical interview, it's not just about the actual technology, or like, for example, in coding, it's not just about coding it up, right? A lot of other things go into play. Communication is one thing I mentioned. Other things are such things such as, are you, uh, once you did the code, wrote the code, did you proactively offer to test your code, or did you just say, hey, I'm done, this should work, and then the interviewer says, hey, do you want to test it, right? So the suggestion to test should come from you proactively. Don't wait for them to tell you. Um, did you point out, the trade-offs, or in case of coding, for example, time and space complexities on your own? Again, you want to proactively talk about those things, the costs, right? The times, space, etc. The thing is, when you talk about these other things like trade-offs and the costs and all, or options, what you're showing is an engineering mindset. And these companies, especially the top companies, they're not looking to hire coders. They're looking to hire engineers, problem solvers. And so if you show an engineering mindset in addition to everything else, that obviously helps you. Uh, System design, yeah, some people, that's another important one we talked about. Uh, and the behavioral, right? So sometimes there might be red flags where the candidate blames the company or talks down about their current or the previous company, which is not a great thing to do. It doesn't get you anything except maybe negative points, maybe. Um, arrogance, etc., right? So I think a lot of these actually are obvious, but we just still wanted to kind of put these down here. Um, and then, of course, raising the bar. These tier 1 companies, they want to hire somebody that's at or better the current levels or the people, right? Okay. All right, we'll go on. Um, in terms of the DSA, the data structures and algorithm uh, expectations, what the slide here is saying, like if it's a mid-level role, uh, they'll get lead code medium and occasional hard problems. Now, these are not hard and fast rules, okay? You could get, even for a senior position, sometimes you could get a medium question, or even for a junior position, sometimes you could get a hard question, right? So I think there is a lot of variability on that, and to be honest, in my opinion, there's a bit of luck involved, right? It shouldn't be that way. I agree, but I'm just telling you how it is, right? So um, the, from your perspective, of course, you're preparing across the spectrum, uh, but don't have any hard expectations on, hey, I have 2 years of experience and hence I should likely be getting a medium question. It could go either way. Okay. Uh, and then, for example, the second bullet here says Google is usually emphasizing on efficiency and, how efficient is the algorithm. And Google does that, Google deals with a lot of data, but, of course, so does every other company at this point, right? And so these are algorithms or solutions that have to work with huge amount of data. And that's where, I mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, I mentioned when you propose a solution, proactively talk about the costs, the time cost or the space cost, time space complexities and such. And this is an example of why we need to do that, because all of these companies now deal with huge amounts of data. So if you propose an algorithm that's, I don't know, let's say quadratic complexity or even worse, exponential, it's just not going to work for real world data sizes, right? So you want to be able to show that. Okay. But the bottom line is they are testing your computer science fundamentals, problem solving skills, coding skills. And for example, this IK program, this is whatever program that, and Rohan will probably talk about the details later, but um, whatever program, is appropriate for you, or whatever domain is appropriate for you. One thing is for sure that, there's a lot of resources that get provided, and a lot of these things that we are talking about are happening on a daily basis, essentially. And so it kind of gets ingrained in you that this is what I need to do. This is, how I need to propose solutions or my approaches, etc., right? All right. System design is, of course, like I said earlier, greater than, 3 or 4 approximately years of experience. System design is definitely going to show up in your on-site loop. Um, Now, with system design, um, it is, especially for senior staff level roles, it becomes more important, and you'll typically have more than one system design interviews. And it 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 can also have an effect on the levels, just like behavioral also has an effect on the level. Like sometimes people get down leveled, and system design is eh, can do that. Like performance, when I mean performance in system design or performance in even behavioral can do that. Okay. Um, Behavioral, again, we kind of briefly talked about it, but there is some red flags, and then, you know, that's something to keep in mind. A lot of these might be obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times I've seen some people touch on some of these things, right? Uh, either knowingly or unknowingly, I don't know, but so it may be obvious, but it still is worth looking at what are these things. And it's one thing to kind of have this list in front of you, but it's another thing to actually, for example, what comes to mind right now is mock interviews. So as part of the IK package, there is a bunch of multiple mock interviews that they offer where you are actually interviewing with a person who's also doing actual real interviews at work, at Microsoft or Amazon or Google, whatever the company is that they're working for, right? And at the end of the mock interview, they will, you have like 10, 15, 20 minutes of feedback on your performance in the mock. Now, this feedback never ever happens in a real interview, right? And and so what I was going with that is, there's these red flags that, we know about them, we can read about them and all that, but you can't teach driving by just telling somebody how to drive. So they need to actually get in the driver's seat and do the driving to actually learn it, right? So that's where the mock interviews come in. So with this knowledge, then do the mocks, see what mistakes you made, what things you did right, and then you kind of progress from there. So those, I kind of wanted to mention that becomes important. Okay. Uh, there is a raising bar with interviews where uh, companies, the bar raiser is actually a term that is in Amazon, used in Amazon. I've not worked at Amazon, but I kind of know from having talked to many people over the years, right? Um, Bar raising is a term from Amazon, but many companies do that and they have different names for it. Um, but essentially, it is some senior person who is experienced with interviews um, is is part of the loop, and you, usually, no, I won't say every time, but usually they are not necessarily from the team that's hiring that person, right? If that person is for a specific team. In some cases, the person is not for a specific team; they're being hired, and then they're going to team match, right? So in that case, of course, it's just going to be somebody from any team. But they are trying to figure out based on the feedback and everything else, and their own training, that is this person going to be at or above the current level, right? The current level of people, skill from a skill perspective, right? And so their feedback is very important, and it's very hard to overturn whatever they decide. But again, that's not to scare you or anybody. It's just as you go into interviews, it's good to be aware of how you're going to be evaluated and who you're talking to, right? And such. Uh, so that's basically what we're trying to say here. Compensation, well, the FAANG companies, they have awesome compensation. That's why it's so competitive, and that's why, having a solid preparation for it is important. Um, and so this is just listing some numbers here. These are again, just some numbers. They vary a lot between how what levels people get hired on and how the stock does. Most importantly, right? If the stock does awesome, these numbers are much higher than what you're seeing on the slide here. Um, Startup compensation. Well, if you're applying for startups, there's pros and cons, right? In startups, there is more potential, but there's also more risk. Uh, and if people are, one of the things, and I'm going to say one of the thing and not the only thing. So one of the things there is equity that you get in a startup, which has uh, a huge amount of, a huge potential. Getting some shares from, if somebody joins Microsoft and they or Meta or Google or whatever, and they get, some shares versus joining a startup and they get some shares there. Obviously, the potential usually on the startup is much higher, but the risk is also much higher, right? So I don't want to say that, startups will always succeed. In fact, a huge number of startups actually don't succeed, right? But the ones that do succeed, the people come out worth multiple millions, right? even people who have may have only like 1 or 2 years of experience, they could come out that way. So there's always a stage startups, there is mid stage, they've gone through Series B, C financing. There's a unicorn startup, of course, that are more than a billion in valuation and such. So again, it it depends on what opportunities you have, what opportunities you are comfortable with, right? And I want to say what opportunities you have, because it's not something that you control yourself. That hey, I want to join this, and depending on what your timeline is, you may or may not get that opportunity. So maybe you need to be a little flexible. But varies from person to person, varies from every situation is different. But these are the kind of things you want to keep in mind. Is earlier the startup stages, the higher the risk, and but the higher the potential. And so you kind of have to figure out what you're comfortable with, and what opportunities you you are able to get. Okay. This slide here, again, this is a rough guideline. That is, this isn't trying to say this is exactly how it works, right? Tier 1, for example, the left column, Tier 1 bank companies, number of rounds, about 5. Tier 2, it says 3 to 4, semi-structured. Well, but again, these are not fixed, hard and fast rules. They could also have, some Tier 2 companies could also have 5 rounds. But the general, the takeaway from this slide is that a depending on whether it's a Tier 1 established company versus on the other extreme, it's a startup. The methodology could be different, and usually is different. A lot of times, for example, companies are really small, they don't have enough staff, and so their initial round might just be like a take-home test where they'll ask you to, hey, here's a coding problem, go solve it and submit that within, I don't know, 8 hours or 24 hours or whatever the case might be. Um, so there's this whole spectrum of things, and what I would recommend doing is whenever you are talking to a company, whether it's a recruiter or a hiring manager or whoever, some contact in the company who is, your interface when they're trying to set up your interview, make sure you ask them questions um, on the logistics, right? Are you going to be given an IDE, or are they expecting you to have like a Word document or a Google Doc where you're going to be writing code? And if they're using an IDE, it would make sense for you to go to that IDE and just try it out, just be familiar with it, right? Are there any language specific requirements, or can you use whatever language you are, strongest in? And such like, basically get a sense of what their process is, because every company is different. And like I said, this slide here is just not meant to be taken like as a hard and fast rule. Uh, I would say similar thoughts on this slide. Again, this is one example of things, and not like a hard and fast rule, but preparing for these, you are, for example, here it says for Tier 1 interviews, medium to hard. For Tier 2 interviews, medium level coding. Uh, yeah, I mean, I believe that, but these are not hard and fast rules, right? But the bottom line is, take your preparation seriously. Don't wing it. Don't think, let me just go and see what happens. Why would you do that, right? Why would you waste a chance, especially if it's a company that you care about? Um, because if somebody shows up without much preparation, and they don't do well, and they are in cold storage for, I don't know, 6 months, 1 year, or whatever it is, right? So you want to give it your best shot and prepare for it, and yeah, I mean, be more structured in your preparation. All right. Hey
Yes.
Ron, how are we doing? Sorry, go
Hey,
ahead. Yeah.
I'll be there with you. I'll assist you in that. Sanjeev, I'll just like quickly set the guidelines for folks. If you could move to the next slide. I'll keep your screen share. That's perfectly fine. If you could move to the next slide, the speed mock interviews. I'll just very quickly tell them about the process. Yeah, so folks, will do this very quickly. I think the session predominant. So just to give you context where we are with regards to the sessions for the day, the core content for the software piece is right now done. We'll do like speed mocks for the next 20 to 30 minutes. This will help you brush up your interview skills, get some real-time feedback from Sanjeev, and also just see the ideal way to do a problem statement. We would love to take as many as possible, but again, we are time constrained. How we will go about it, we'll first display the question on the screen. There will be certain scoping things that will be called out. Then again, speaker in this case being Sanjeev will briefly explain the high level scope so why everyone understands the problem. If you want to attempt it, please raise your hand. We will randomly select one or two people to address each problem statement depending on how much time we have. After the attempt, we will explain the right way and the ideal way to solve the question. Again, there is no right way to solve the question, but one of the best ways to solve the question is what we will come up with. And if there's any feedback fundamentally there, we'll be happy to address it. You folks ready? Just give me a small yes in the chat. That'd be super helpful. Just keep some energy going, and that'd be super helpful for us. Sure. Sandeep, if you could move to the next slide, we'll have the first question on your screen. Sandeep, if you would want to address the question, the requirement, the constraints, then I'll happily unmute somebody post that.
Okay, so you are unmuting it. All right, so
Yeah, I
I'm
will
gonna
take
keep.
care of all the
Awesome.
logistical things for you.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Let me just move this window then. All right, so the first question here is we are designing a high-scale URL shortening service. Sure, people have looked at something like Bitly, basically the short URLs. So you take a long URL and then it returns a short URL. It's easier to remember, easier to share with other people or type it up. And so that's what the requirement says. The problem statement here is users create short URLs given, a long URL as an input. The requirements, I'll actually let you folks look at the requirements instead of reading every single bullet here. But that's the problem that we are trying to solve is the input is a long URL and the output is a short URL. Long URL could be, 50 characters, could be 100 characters or whatever, right? But the short URL typically is going to be, let's say, 6 or 7 characters long. Not counting the HTTP and all that, but the actual URL is going to be, let's say, 6 to 7 um, characters long for, after the domain and all that. So you see the requirements there in front of you, and then and the constraints. But happy to hear somebody's thought. Like Rohan said, whoever wants
Raise your
to,
hands and we'll take you live.
yeah.
Don't be shy. There's nobody, nobody's gonna know who you are. There could be you could perfectly like goof up. That's perfectly fine. But not to like scare you also. But just raise your hands. We'll be happy to take somebody live. If you are in the middle of interview processes, you're already doing interviews, you're prepping for them, would be a good place to start this. Sandeep has raised his hand. Thank you, Sandeep, for volunteering. I'm allowing you to unmute. Would be great if you have allowed you to talk, Sandeep. It would be great if you could give us a quick background about yourself. What are you currently doing? What is your experience like? And then take a stab at it answering the question. Stick to very high level details, structurally more important than getting into the nitty-gritties. Over to you, Sandeep.
Can you hear me, guys? Yeah.
We can hear you loud and clear, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm in software for like close to 20 years now. So I'm a development manager at one of the leading banks in Canada. Yeah, so that's how my background goes, and I've been in Java, J2EE, and mostly on the distributed systems, and currently into the data engineering roles.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you, Sandeep. Sandeep, would you want to take a stab at the problem statement? If you have any clarifying questions, feel free to ask Sanjeev. We'll be happy to assist you. Otherwise, if you want to
Yeah,
structurally address it, we'll be happy to answer that.
yeah, sure. I think I'll get started. I mean, I don't have like much questions because the problem seems to be like straightforward. I'm assuming
Yeah.
like some of the constraints as well. So yeah, so for the users, primarily, this is not business logic intensive. It's mostly to do with how we scale and how we take the request from multiple places. So one thing that I'm already assuming is that traffic is also global, not just from like one location, right? So to start with, what the core idea is, like, it's an API, so which needs to perform like few get and post URLs. Like the redirect is the major thing that would be read heavy. And when a user is actually creating the API, so he would be providing a dirty URL and a preferable whatever is the short form of it. So that would be for a create, a post API. And I'm not going into the intricacies of the front end. The front end would be like a very basic two fields with, like, some front end validations and back end validations to avoid any cross-site scripting and all. And so my API would have one post request where it generates, and one redirect request where it takes a request and, like, when it is redirecting wherever. So, and when it is read heavy, there would be like a backend database, obviously. And since it is read heavy, every time I'm not going to the database and coming out and giving them the dirty URL. So I would have a very good caching layer in between, and also for assuming that the requests come from like multiple places, I would have more like the same whatever is my core API is residing, I would actually distribute it across and have a DNS or a load balancer on top of that. So, and one of the constraint is moderate writes. Can you explain a little more on what moderation is referring to here?
Yeah, so what that's referring to is typically you would expect that far more people are going to be actually reading the URL than creating a URL. The writes are gonna happen when you are creating a URL, but then for every
Okay,
write that happens, a lot of other people are going to be accessing it. That's what they're trying to say.
sounds good. Okay, so moderate here is basically the magnitude, not the moderation, right? So
Yeah,
not kind
correct,
of
correct,
yeah,
correct.
gating. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
correct.
makes sense. Yeah, that's where I couldn't relate what yeah. But even talking
No
about the
problem.
other part of
Look,
moderation and gating, we would have some kind of trying to avoid like the DDoS and all.
yeah,
And one more thing is, like, since, like, it's a very simple API, people can actually create attacks, like, where they can actually automate and create like multiple requests. So I'm not sure like if you have to address those, but like as part of this, that's from the design. But yeah, I would be now making sure that my API will have all these
hmm yeah,
IP based, and, like, if the request is coming from the same place for,
right,
like, DDoS attacks and all, I
correct.
would have some kind of a throttle filter and trying to see and all,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and maybe some kind of a filter even on the UI. If it is not coming from the UI, if it is coming through an API, I might actually want to moderate as well, like, trying to put an IP filter on my request. Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the main thing here is also caching and distribution. So in case of cache down, I would actually go back to the backend. But here I have to minimize the database hits, except for, the initial write. So I would have any caching layer which is also distributed based on like the global level, depending on, like, my geographical spread. Yeah, so I think that kind of answers the high level availability and scalability. Yeah. Protection against collision and abuse. I think I've already answered the abuse. So collision also kind of can be handled by how I distribute the incoming traffic. Here I'm assuming the collision is too many requests coming into one particular location or one particular load balancer. Uh,
Or
uh,
also kind of hinting at when you are generating the URLs, the short form URLs, you don't want any collisions or
oh,
any,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
makes sense,
But
makes
yeah,
sense. So
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
you,
so given there is a possibility of collision, but given people might use something personalized, I would not spend too much energy on synchronization or things like that. So maybe, I would still implement maybe whenever, like, the user is giving it, like, do the check availability kind of a button, so that, like, if I'm going back and responding with availability to someone, like, I might put a lock on, like, I might have like another intermediate database or, like, a
correct.
Redis kind of a thing to hold what are being given as the short forms, so that, like, I don't have to go all the way to the backend. I'm relatively handling with a very less number, maybe at a 10K or 15K at a given point in time. So that can actually handle the collisions by giving that extra step, verify and all. So we would encourage users to have a, I mean, by default behavior would be like generate, and I would make the short form optional, so that everyone doesn't have to really choose with, as they're more likely to choose something very generic than personal. So
Right.
that's
Awesome.
that's also more on the back end and also on the behavior or UX experience.
Okay. Awesome. Cool.
Uh, Thanks, Sandeep. Thank you so much for taking a stab at it. And just to call out, thank you for breaking the ice for us. You're the first person who addressed it. Sanjeev, you'd be like, it would be great if you could move to the way to solve it. I think Sandeep has covered most, if not all, of the cases as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sorry, I
agree.
think I might be like talking too much, trying
No,
to
no,
put
that's
so many
totally
No,
things
no,
fine.
in
no.
short
Totally
time.
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you so
No, appreciate your answer, Sandeep. Like Rohan said, I totally appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I think your answer was pretty good. You covered a lot of the things that we wanna cover. And let's go on to this slide. And give me 1 second. I want something here. Yeah. So like I think Sandeep, well, these are one of the first things Sandeep mentioned is it's one of the things to keep in mind here is that scalability, right? Traffic is global, redirection is important. And so that is the very important call out that he made, which is, hey, in this, we understand what the problem is, but then imagine it's a read heavy system. X number of people, X number of URLs are going to get created, short URLs are going to get created, but the amount of read is going to be, I don't know, 1000x, maybe 10,000x, right? Or more. And so the redirection performance is important. You don't want this short URL to introduce, heavy latency. Then, people are not as likely to use it. So that's one of the first few things that Sandeep had called out, right? But here, again, I'm not going to drain the slide, but the essence of this is of talking about this is how are you like what are your you know top 2 or 3 things that you are going to address in addition to obviously solving the problem. Uh, so actually, before I go into that, let me quick spend 30 seconds on a general high-level template for system design interviews, right? The one that's kind of most commonly accepted, most common. You start with the functional requirements, then you go into the non-functional requirements. In non-functional, you're going to talk about things such as like what Sandeep was bringing up, hey, scaling, redirect performance, et cetera, right? Global traffic, uh, availability, and reliability, et cetera. Single points of failure. Though that's where you want to talk about in the non-functionals, and then you will either go into estimations or API optional. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But then you'll go into high-level design, and from there you're going to go into deep dives, right? And so when you're starting with the solution, you are in the non-functionals. What you're doing is you're bringing up the some of the things that are more relevant to the question that is being asked, and those are the ones that you're going to address typically in your deep dives. Okay, so the high level design is addressing the functional requirements. Say, how am I going to achieve what my functional requirements are, right? And so, for example, here the functional requirements are I just need to return a short code given the long URL. The others here, like low latency redirects, reliable storage, these are all non-functional requirements. So typically, high-level design addresses functional requirements, and then deep dives is typically where you are going to talk about how do I make this, faster, scalable, blah blah blah, right? And so yeah, uh, some of the common, like on the right side, if you see, it says common traps. Uh, it, some of the mistakes that commonly that are made by people are you specify some tech choices, but you don't specify the reason on why you're picking something, right? Um, Not talking about collisions where if you're returning a short URL given a long URL, depending on what your algorithm is to generate the short URL, you may expect collisions, may or may not, right? But if you expect collisions, that's something you need to uh, guard against. If somebody's asking for a custom URL then of course you want to check, is this custom URL somehow, already taken by somebody else? So those are the things that you want to bring about. Now, and the third bullet is also important, and actually Sandeep did address it, right? Redirect performance is important, right? Which is, when you're reading it and redirecting it. So and the way Sandeep addressed it in his answer is he talked about a cache, right? Now, we only, gave him a couple of minutes or to answer, in an interview. Of course, he would have more time. But then when you talk about caching, you're going to talk about eviction policies and, cache growing and et cetera, right? Or read copies and all that, right? But at a high level, he did address it, right? And so anyway, so the point here is a good answer will cover typically in the deep dives will cover the trade-offs and the various options for addressing the non-functional requirements that you have talked about hopefully in the beginning of the session. Okay. And so as part of your answer, you might touch upon a lot of these things that you're seeing on this slide. And I'm not going to drain through the slide and talk about every single bullet. We don't have that much time. But I mean, at a high level, these points are the ones that you want to keep in mind when you're giving this answer. CDN is something, like, again, in the broader umbrella of caches, they would fall under that broader umbrella. Okay. All right, let's, I know we are
Sanjeev, could
running
you
up
move
against
back
time.
to the
Yeah.
previous screen once if it's okay? I think
Oh,
a lot of people will might want to screen grab it. So again, the idea way is not to give you a drill down answer. It's just more to talk about the core pieces that your answer should cover eventually. The next slide one, the next one,
okay. This
wherein
one?
all the fundamental pillars. Yeah. So the idea is to share what are the core pillars that you should address within your answer. So if you want to screen grab it, feel free to. Anyways, moving on to the next question. Um, yeah. Sanjeev, over to you if you could explain it. Folks, while you're reading it, feel free to raise your hand. I think Sandeep did a good job in terms of breaking the ice, like I mentioned. Feel free to raise your hand and we'll be happy to take you live. Over to you,
Awesome.
Sandeep.
So this one is talking about, can you tell us about a time where you improved the performance of a backend service? Explain what the issue was. So basically give us the context, how you identified the issue and what's the solution. And then finally, how did you measure it and what was the impact essentially? Any volunteers?
I'm checking. There is one. We have Vijay Kumar. He is willing to. Vijay, I'm allowing you to talk. Again, the very basic template. Just give us a brief introduction of who you are, what have you been doing, and your brief info about your background, and then take a stab at the problem statement, man.
Hi, this is Vijay, and I have overall 20 plus years of experience. Um, yeah, so that's pretty much about me. I'm into this from the beginning Java and GT only, microservices in Java. So regarding this problem statement, right? So is it? I mean, the problem is about one particular problem or any system change you're talking about here?
Any example that you may have experienced in your career so far?
So one recent example I can talk about is the we had one monolith application which was serving on one of our premium customers, which had like a bottleneck of its performance. So that is something we transformed into a microservice architecture actually. So, but it's not about technology. Basically, it was all one particular application serving all the customers, and the scaling was very problematic. So that's where I considered it the microservice the right solution to take it, because we can scale the services horizontally, and wherever we need, we can put more instances. So that is one thing in my recent project I have done, and we at least got a good 40% improvement in the performance for that. So basically, the problem statement is basically the bottleneck was the performance because it was choking the system when people are more accessing the application, right? So I had to find the solution for that. So the way I considered it was to break it down to one UI and backend as microservices, and and the backend is, I mean, it involves in the contacting third party also behind the scenes. So we one more thing I considered in that for the performance was make some of the calls asynchronous to make sure like the UI is not waiting for unnecessary calls to acknowledge, whichever go in offline mode. Those we like fire and forget sort of calls, right? So that is something I took into consideration while building the services. Some asynchronous services I have built. Yeah, so these two, especially the architecture itself, I made it scalable horizontally with services. And another thing is I considered the asynchronous services. And third part is basically, I mean, structurally, even the DB also I scaled it horizontally, like we had replication. So that way the request goes to the proximity properly. So these are the four things I considered to migrate the application to the microservices and improve the performance.
Awesome. Thank you, Vijay. Again, appreciate you volunteering and sharing your experience.
I think Sanjeev, just one call, right? Like I think Venkata has said like both the question answered by somebody with 20 years of experience. Like feel free to take a stab at it, folks. Like somebody who's in the early years of experience, we would love to have your answers as well, so that you can get some live feedback if you're looking for it. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks, Vijay. And again, I think what Vijay presented was the context, and then kind of some 3 steps that he or his team kind of followed, and went from there. Again, we didn't give him much time, so he is kind of super shortening it. Some of the things, just as an observation that, and I'm sure Vijay would add those if we had given him more time, is you would want to also give a sense of, and I mean, I'm speaking in general, but how many, teams, if there's multiple teams involved, you want to talk about that, because that also gives a sense of, okay, driving across teams, cross-team collaboration, how many people were involved? Was it just one person sitting in a cube doing it, or was it a team of, whatever, 5, 6 people or whatever it is? And approximate amount of time that was spent, like, was it a short 3-day project, which I don't think this looks like a 3-day project, but, um, give a sense of the time taken. So, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is the person who's listening to them, to the candidate, is he doesn't know, right? They're building their mental picture based on exactly what you tell them and nothing else, right? And if it's a project that you pick that involves cross-team collaboration, or had an impact, or had a VP level, visibility, you want to call those things out. And again, this is why it's important to practice these things, because sometimes, if you just wing it and you're going to talk on this on the spot, right? You might miss out on some important details, or you'll remember them later and then say, oh, I forgot to tell you about this, and add something here and there, so it becomes a little more haphazard, right? So, but yeah, let's move on to the next slide here, and then um, look at this. So a strong answer, like we're all familiar with the STAR pattern, right? Which is, hey, give me the context, what's the problem, and investigation, solution, and then the results. And I think at a high level, Vijay did follow that, right? They explained what the issue was and what the actions were. The impact was 40% improvement, et cetera, right? Now, to be fair, again, just like with Sandeep, we didn't give Vijay much time, right? So it was like a really, really compressed answer, but given more time, I'm sure, Vijay would talk about some of the other details on, some of the technologies involved, some of the, tools involved, et cetera, et cetera. Um, um, and then, so yeah, things to keep in mind here would then be talking about when you give the context and you talk about the actions, you are specifically at that point talking about the actions that you did, not your team. So a lot of times you want to use I, uh, uh, but where there's that is not to say that you want to take all the credit where the team must have been involved as well, right? But you don't want to do that, but you are instead focusing on, it's about you, the interview is about you, right? On what your input was and what your impact was. So that also has to be part of the answer. Yeah, so I think understanding the problem, root cause analysis, how did you figure things out, looking at options for solutions, how do you fix it, and then eventually picking something and then giving the reasons on why you picked whatever you picked, and then finally what happened, right? So at a high level, we talked about that. And so, okay, I think keeping time in mind, we'll move on.
Yeah, I think you can take this as the last question, Sanjeev, before we move to the final section of yours.
Okay, so you mean okay,
This
so
being the question 3 would be the last one.
Will be the last one. Okay, sounds good. So this one's talking about explain 3 effective techniques to reduce actual and perceived page load time for a front-end web application. And I'll let you folks read the rest, but that's what it's asking about is how do we meaningfully improve the page load rendering and what it feeds to the user, the perceived page load time. Any volunteers?
Just scrolling through the attendee section. Give me a sec. Yeah, we have Lalita who wants to address it. Lalita, I'm allowing you to talk again, the same template. Share us in briefly about who you are, like what your experience is, and then take a stab at it.
Hey, I'm Lalita Shankar, and I have like 13 plus years of experience. And I was initially a developer and then moved on as a technical program manager. And more recently, I work for a large bank as a technology program manager overseeing large programs. So we are here going to be talking about the 3 effective techniques. You've already given me the hints that I need to consider reducing the network load, improving asset delivery, and making rendering faster, improving perceived load experience. Okay, so I'm going to take first the improving the asset delivery. So let's just take some example. So if you are going to be delivering, let's say, a feed, like if your user is constantly getting a feeds, and then you don't want to be on the fly generating those feeds and then send the feeds. It may have like a, let's say if it is songs, they may have a song album cover, or they may have a short video or whatever that you are trying to send. So those may take time to load, and then the user may not see the immediate action on their screens. So to reduce the time for showing the feeds really faster, the one improvement that we can do is to have like a already prepare each user, right? We already know what from his profile, what are all his preferences, whom he's following, and then what kind of videos he likes, and what are all the current trending videos. So based on those contents, we can generate the feeds already and keep it cached so that we'll be able to show them faster. Okay, that's one way to do. And then another one is improving the asset delivery. Like let's say, like if the user is far away in Australia, and another user is in one is in North America and one is in Canada, and different locations. And if you have all these content delivery networks, which are all geo positioned, then you once you push all your the latest videos, right, whichever is the currently trending videos, if you already, if let's say like president is tweeting, and then if that is the first one that comes, then maybe you can take that as soon as the first or second time that request comes, you can multiply it and then push it to all the CDNs so that it gets the right kind of hits, and people are all able to download, and then without much lag time they are able to see it. That is one way to do it. And then uh, rendering faster is like instead of uh, taking the whole content from the server, chunking it, and then sending it to the buffer and then loading it on the user, you can use the client side uh, um, cache, so that the client already downloads, and then they get to see within the 200 millisecond, they are able to see the first frames, and then you are able to continue the flow so that they are able to see the thing. And also one other idea would be like, depending on the network, somebody could be at um, I don't know the exact numbers. Maybe somebody is in the 420, somebody is 780, somebody's device is at 1180, whatever their resolution is. Based on that, when we are uploading a video itself, we should be able to create all these different resolution videos and then keep it so that you can send the correct URL based on their device type and send them. Another one would be also based on the network speed where they are located. You can do those.
Awesome.
And
Cool.
making rendering faster, minimizing JS work, optimizing critical path. Making the customer go to the nearest data center, or having data centers and CDNs is what is going to help. Yeah, those are the
Awesome.
things I'm able to immediately think.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Lalita, for sharing that. And yeah, so let me go to the next slide here. So some of the things here that you want to talk about at a high level is, so there's the actual load time, there's the perceived load time. With respect to actual load time, we would talk about things such as minifying or compressing the, the actual payload that's coming back to the client, right? CDNs, caching, I think Lalita mentioned some of those. That's another thing, right? Which is if things can be, if there's some parts of it that are static, then, you would want to put them on the CDN. And then for perceived response, and I'm kind of going through this fast, but and I'm not going to write every single bullet point here, but from a perceived performance perspective, it's kind of like you don't load the whole page from A to Z, but you kind of prioritize what needs to be loaded first, and then what can be done async, like what they call lazy loading. And so that gives a perceived performance, meaning the page may not have fully loaded yet, but the user sees the important parts come up, and from their mental perspective or visual perspective, they're like, okay, yeah, things have loaded, although something that's still happening in the background, right? So that's the perceived performance aspect that it was is talking about. And so common traps, only talking about one type of optimization, like maybe only caching or such. Not talking about perceived performance, because that is part of the question, right? So it's kind of hard to miss that. But let's keep going here. So at a high level, the strategies would be, you want to reduce the network load. Okay, so for that, compression, minification, and such, removing unused packages. Okay, so those are kind of like the obvious ones that you would talk about. Improving delivery, so then CDNs and caches would come into the picture there. Faster rendering, so now it's a question of rendering. So here, again, what are the critical parts of it? What are the not critical parts of it, which you can maybe lazy load. And then going on to the fourth bullet, improving perceived load time. We talked about it a little bit. Again, lazy loading. And then finally, talking about the actual monitoring, right? So you have all of this, but then the answer is not going to be complete unless you talk about monitoring, because while you may have solved the problem, what are the guarantees 6 months from now, 1 year from now, it remains solved? Like people, these are all constantly evolving projects. People add more new functionality. So we don't want to break something that we want, that we feel is important, right? So talk about monitoring, and then the various metrics like time to first byte, or LCP, and TTI, and all these, right? So these are all um, different metrics that get looked at. TTFB is not mentioned here, but that's another one, right? So again, in a good answer, you want to talk about a lot of these things. It doesn't mean that you need to talk about every single thing here, because time is limited. But as long as you give a reasonable answer and you cover a lot of things, then you have good discussion, good trade-off, and reasoning on why you are talking about whatever you're talking. Then that would make a strong answer. Okay. All right, thanks everyone. Sandeep, Lalita, and Vijay for the answers. Now, Rohan, you said we are going to skip the next.
Yeah, we can skip the speed mocks, considering we're already at 7:26 like we're already at the time, 4 to 5 minutes into the session. We can get to the H1B section, the
Okay.
last one.
Oops. Okay. So this is information on H1Bs, because again, those have become come a lot under focus here. But I think what slide is trying to show is that H1Bs are still happening, and like up here on this box on the right is just talking about 2025, where these companies had a bunch of these H1 approved. So it hasn't, like, it's not like it's completely gone or anything like that, right? They're still happening. There may be additional scrutinization being done, but that's fine, right? I mean, it's all. Anyway, what we are trying to do is there's nothing illegal about it. So we are all above the board, and so these things are not down to zero. The tap is still open, and that's what this is trying to slide is trying to show. And Rohan, if I missed something, some point you think you want to mention, then
Yeah, sure, no
feel free
worries. I think
to.
the first one is predominantly around establishing context. It's okay. No worries. You can move to the next one.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is about, again, referring to AI upskilling, which is definitely important. Like we already established and mentioned earlier, that AI is an important integral part of engineering going forward, and so that AI knowledge, AI fluency is going to be tested in interviews, and because there's more scrutiny and focus on these H1 visas. Again, they're not stopped; they're still there, but there's more focus on it. So it makes sense to have all the prep done to make yourself the better qualified candidate, right? Uh, and then things like, for example, uh, this first box here is talking about some of the common, the hot areas currently, and then if you have referrals, if you can, in your network, you have people who work for certain companies that you're interested in, definitely feel free to ping them. Utilize your network, right? You utilize your network, other people are going to utilize you once you get placed, and so it's all a give and take, and that's kind of how the ecosystem works. And then the last thing I want to mention here, the last bullet, is very important. Always warm interview state. When you and this is important, a lot of people actually don't do that, but should, which is as you go through your life, as you go through your work projects, right, you work on, um, keep this thread running in the back of your head, in the background, where you are, always passively, or either passively or actively, but at least passively preparing for your next interview. That could happen 6 months from now. That could happen, 2 years from now. Um, but what would you do there? Well, keep your knowledge up to date. Like a program like IK is is an excellent program in terms of, giving you a lot of the resources, a lot of the information, a lot of the fundamental knowledge. But then this isn't a sprint, like it's a marathon. So, your learning never stops. It continues, and this is just providing you kind of like an accelerated, um, first step to get into that state. But always be ready for interviews, whether you're coding every now and then, reading up blogs on system design. A lot of these companies like Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Netflix, they have awesome blogs, and it makes sense to kind of keep up to date and be in that like a warm interview state. Going forward, this is talking about, for people who are affected by layoffs, like a rough plan. Again, it doesn't mean you need to follow this to the dot, but this is some ideas on what are the kind of things you want to do if somebody gets laid off, with respect to, refreshing their network. And again, refer back to the previous thing, which said always be in a warm interview state, which means you're hopefully, more or less visible in your own network, and then in terms of also, practices and all that. But for example, here, if you look at this, it kind of lays out over like a rough timeline of what are the things that you would want to keep in mind. Okay, so again, I won't drain the slide. I will continue here. And these are addressing some myths, like no one is sponsoring H1s, which is not true, right? There's a lot of companies who have sponsored H1s in 2025, and a lot of companies will continue to do that in 2026 and onwards, right? Other myths are like transfers too risky, or the lottery is rigged, H1B's labor is cheap labor. I mean, there's media, and then there's the truth, right? So I use media as a data point, as I think we all do, and then you kind of have to also look at more than one data point, and so kind of come up with your opinion. So H1B's labor is not necessarily cheap. I look at the median salaries here, right? So, but anyway, things to keep in mind, and let's move on. And yeah, that I know we are a little over time a bit, but
I think we can accept the Q&A section for now. Two parts. One is we have a dedicated AMA session with Sanjeev, with Surat, and Sanath, whose sessions are lined up for today and tomorrow. So we have collated all the questions which have come our way. Some are career centric, some are very domain centric, and some are very generic sort of questions that come in the Q&A section and in the chat. We'll be happy to address those. Folks, Sanjeev, you can stop sharing your screen. Firstly, thank you so much for taking this up. Thank you so much for being so vigilant with regards to the speed mocks and just listening to what folks were saying and giving dedicated feedback to them. And another piece is I think a lot of people have asked and about recordings, about slides. We'll keep sharing those. Just like I said, I posted messages about Discord community, so do join them. I may posted message about Slack community. Those are the places you'll get first-hand access to these resources. Sandeep, feel free to drop off. Feel free to stay back. Firstly, thank you so much. Any passing notes you have, would be happy to address. Otherwise, I would want the folks to take like a 5-10 minutes break. While they take a break, I'll be very quickly willing to give them a very brief introduction more into Kickstart. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Awesome. All right. Hey, thanks everyone, and thanks Rohan. Glad to be here, and I'll switch off my audio and video. And thank you.
Yeah. Just give me a sec. Surat, we'll start with yours in like 5 minutes max.
Sure.
Folks, by the way, we have been doing this for almost 95 minutes. Any of you want take a quick water break, take a coffee session, feel free to do that. We'll be quickly going through taking that minute to share like a message from a founder and just very briefly touching about into Kickstart's offerings. Let me share my screen and share my ground. Yeah. Can you folks confirm via chat if my screen is visible? That'd be super helpful for me. Not sure what's happening. Yeah. Thank you so much, Elida. I'm just playing this message from a founder, Ryan Willis.
AI is no longer the future. It is here, it is the now, and it is the skill that every single person in technology notes to be on top of if you want to survive and also thrive in the next many years. This AI wave has unlocked unprecedented opportunities for all of us. If you look at all the hiring over the last few quarters, you see that all the growth has really come in AI roles and now increasingly so in AI-enabled roles. Far more importantly, the compensation that we are seeing here, going up to $1 billion in some cases, is unheralded. It's unprecedented and nothing that we've ever seen before. We ourselves at Interview Kickstart are constantly seeing our own alumni who are AI-enabled or have AI and ML skills getting offers, and in many cases are $300,000 to $400,000 more than their peers simply because they have the AI skill set. The challenge, though, is that AI is moving at warp speed. It's moving so fast that it's very difficult to figure out both where to start and how to pick a path that is customized, or to use a word often used these days, fine-tuned for you. That's where we at Interview Kickstart come in. We have built a career acceleration platform that helps you turbocharge your career with AI skills. We've been doing this over the last 12 years, and I've already worked with over 25,000 working professionals from all domains in tech: software, product, data, ICs, managers, and the entire like. Our approach is unique. We believe that the frontier of AI has moved to the world's best companies and the world's best AI labs, which is why we bring together a platform of over 700 instructors, all of whom come from the likes of Google, OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic, and other cutting-edge AI companies. Everything that we bring to you is designed, developed, and delivered live by these professionals. And so they bring their frontier lived experience to every single classroom. We also believe that the world has changed. It has moved from an era of passive learning to now active building. And so in each of our programs, you will get your hands dirty. You will build AI projects, all oriented on helping you build an AI portfolio, because that is what is required today if you want to turbocharge your career. Finally, we realize that there is no one-size-fits-all in AI, and AI really needs to meet you where you are at. And all of us are at different levels, have different experience, have different backgrounds. And so we offer a plethora of courses that is completely flexible. They range from 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, spend more than a year as well, based on your career goal. They're fine-tuned for every domain. We have 18 to 20 domains that we cover. We have separate courses for ICs, separate courses for managers, and we have versions in pro code, low code, and no code. Bottom line, we want to meet you where you are and work with you step by step as you up level to building a fabulous AI career.
So that was the message, folks. I'll very quickly give you what sort of courses to try and mention that video. So we have two key sections if you look at it. One is the interview prep section and the other is the AI upskilling. So folks who are interested in moving their careers from, let's say, a tier 1 company or a tier 2 company and take a step further to, let's say, a FAANG company or a tier 1 company or a F50, which is usually called, we have Step Up and Level Up, which are predominantly focused on your domains. I'll come to that in a bit, but they're predominantly focused on your domains. They help you prepare for interviews, help you go through, help you build your domain expertise further. And not just that, there lots of mock interviews as part of those, wherein these courses come in. Then there is a course which sits at the intersection of interview prep and AI, which is called EDGA, where we help you prepare for interviews. Along with that, we help you build the Gen AI expertise. I think Sanjeev, the way he mentioned, the AI skills that you need to acquire, in addition to that, the core domain skills that you need to be aware of. So think of it as something where we help you build your core domain skills, and on top of it, help you build your Gen AI expertise. And then we have full-fledged flagship ML courses, advanced ML courses for people who are looking to switch their domains. The first were predominantly about company switching, for lack of a better word. The other two one are predominantly about domain switching. Hence, they require much longer time, more than 7 months, more than 12 months. In addition, we have agentic AI courses, which are predominantly around like building a Gen AI expertise if you're not looking to prepare for interviews per se. Very quickly, like most of these courses, they come with money back guarantee. We provide placement assistance, alumni scholarships are there, and financing options are also available. When I was talking about the interview prep predominantly is a very customized course because we believe that no one size fits all sort of an approach works when it comes to your tech preparation. So hence you'll see how we have broken it down is in terms of career stages. Somebody, let's say, is in early career stage, so it's a generic course that we offer. Somebody, let's say, who is an experienced IC, so we have back end, front end, full stack sort of courses available with us. And let's say somebody is a senior professional, you're in EM, product management, TPM sort of roles is what you're targeting or what you're already at. We have management related courses as well. Coming on to the AI side, we believe there's an AI up-leveling curve, which we help you understand where you are at and eventually where you want to be at. So, for example, so for two parts. One is we don't cater to the augmentation side, the basic generic stuff like how do you start working with LLMs or how do you work on productivity with AI copilots. But on the transformation side is where we predominantly focus on. So, for example, somebody is in the middle stage, like you want to build complex AI agents or you want to build Gen AI apps. And the roles that you want to target are AI SWE, AI product managers, AI EMs. So, this is the place we believe comes in when our edge up sort of a course fits in. Somebody who is looking to build on top of advanced models or build complex models. Then, for the folks who want to target modern ML engineers, deep advanced ML engineers, believe the larger courses, your flagship ML course, your advanced ML course are the courses that really work well. So, like I was mentioning, from the transformation stage, if you're in the middle to the early stages of the transformation, Edge Up is the courses that you should look for. If you're looking to switch domains, flagship ML and advanced ML courses are that you should predominantly look for. In terms of what we mentioned, our courses are completely customizable. Most of them you can add interview prep or delete on top of it, but the results speaks for themselves. People who have gone through our courses, the typical maximum salary that they have seen is somewhere around salary increment that they have seen is somewhere around 150K, and the typical minimum is somewhere around 75K. I think this is it from me as of now. If you would want to understand more about our offerings, feel free to drop in a message, feel free to address to a poll, and we'll have our program advisors reach out to you soon. Now we have Suhrid with us. Suhrid, let me just stop sharing my screen. Give me a sec. Folks, I've just launched a poll. It would be great if you could address it. By the way, folks have asked how old is the company? We are almost a decade old company. We have 25,000 plus alumni with us. I should have mentioned those on slides, but I think somebody was asking for it. Folks, there was a poll which will help us understand who have tuned in right now for the folks who joined specifically in for the data session. Please answer this. We'll be happy to address, cater our delivery based on that. So, while the answer coming, just to give you a very high level lay of the land, more than 60% of the folks who are tuned in right now are from data.
Great.
Apart from that, the primary goal for attending the event, as it like kind of like the whole theme of the event is how to master interview preparation for tier 1 roles, followed by understanding what are the latest trends in the tech hiring. Then there is a certain section who would want to understand what AI skills are needed for 2026 interviews in terms of what sort of upskilling that would help them get the right role. Predominantly folks are looking to understand in terms of the goals, is what are how to prepare for interviews for tier 1 companies. And again, there's a certain section in this, I think, which would be very suitable for the content that you're going to give, is how to transition to AI ML roles. That's also something people are interested to know about. So when we say transitioning, these are the folks who are not currently in AI ML roles, but they would want to move towards there. And folks, feel free to respond to this poll. Again, we'll keep checking this in between so that we can tailor our delivery as per that. So, Rid, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks for the quick introduction, Rohan. Can folks see my screen?
We can see you, we can hear you loud and clear, and we can see your screen.
Perfect. Perfect. So today I'll be talking about a little bit of the data and ML engineering interview landscape at FAANG plus companies. So real quick, the agenda for today is just taking a sense of the market, specifically since this advent of agentic AI and Gen AI tools that have popped up since the last 2 years. The market essentially is moving very fast and changing very fast. The interview landscape as well is going through a little bit of a change depending on which company you're interviewing with. So we'll take a look at that. We'll discuss the broad level roles, specifically like business analyst, data analyst, engineers, ML engineers, and then how to crack each of what type of questions are typically asked, what's the background is expected, and how you are expected to answer those questions. That's what we'll look next. Then we'll look at how AI is essentially changing the definition of all of these roles, because almost all of these four roles that I mentioned, specifically business analyst, data engineering, and ML engineer, all of them are having a moment which is being impacted by these new Gen AI tools that are routinely used by engineers and analysts today. We'll do some mock interviews, just like you did in the previous section, and I'll also touch a little bit upon my experience of H1B. Myself coming from an H1B background and then moving on to these companies. So currently, I'm a director of machine learning of Infinite Cooling, which is a climate tech startup based out of MIT. Previously, I was at TikTok. I was working on their e-commerce recommendations and marketplace optimization. I am also actually from a non-machine learning background. So I did my master's and PhD in computational modeling, focusing on like energy systems, thermal systems, and transportation optimization. So there was still a little bit of mathematical modeling involved in what I was doing, but not specifically from the ML side. I did have a background in statistics, theoretical probability, numerical optimization, and all of these foundation layers of machine learning roles. But my background was in warehouse robotics, transportation optimization, and then finally at e-commerce and TikTok, and currently again as a director of machine learning and Gen AI at a climate tech startup. So I'll briefly touch upon towards the end of the presentation. I'll briefly touch upon that journey on how I navigated from a non-machine learning background to um, a machine learning role. So this masterclass, we are targeting folks with typically around 3 to 10 years of experience who are targeting roles at FAANG or FAANG plus companies, who are essentially looking for, again, as I mentioned, four types of roles: data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, and data analysts. And we are targeting this for folks who are seeking to either change um, and either break into these companies or accelerate their growth at their current companies even. So what are the four main domains in data landscape in terms of the jobs that are available right now? In my experience so far, typically I see four broad types of roles, and obviously these are uh, there's a overlap in the definitions of all of these roles, and there might be some different terminology, but generally these broad level roles are data or business analysts, so where the responsibilities are essentially maintaining dashboards using Tableau or Power BI, assessing the metrics, providing business decision support, so product analytics, product analysis. Those are some of the types of job responsibilities that are associated with the data or business analyst role. The next one is data scientist. So data scientists typically involve statistical modeling, experimentation, A/B testing, taking your raw product insights and then transforming them into some business strategy using either a statistical model or a machine learning model. Um, Third type of role is the data engineer. So data engineer role focuses a little bit more downstream of not downstream, but um, the data engineer lays all the foundation, all the tables, all the data engineering pipelines that either the data scientist or the business analyst or data analyst can use to create their dashboarding. Um, so data engineer roles typically revolve around setting up a relational or non-relational databases, writing database pipelines, performing optimizations using big data technologies like PySpark, Apache, not PySpark, Apache Spark, or AWS Glue is another tool that you can use to set up data engineering framework. And finally, the fourth role is machine learning engineer. So machine learning engineer typically take the stuff set up by MLOps or data engineers and then write production grade models on top of these frameworks or on top of this data. So let's talk a little bit about where the opportunities really are and what separates reality from the hype. So typically, all of these data-oriented roles, be it analyst, machine learning engineers, data scientist, all of these roles have seen a significant growth. If you go to Bureau of Labor Statistics, you will get a range of statistics around the growth. But one thing is for certain, which is that data-driven job market is here to stay and here to grow, in fact, at a much higher pace than some of the growth in other sectors. So typically, as you can see here, there's around 20 to 30% year over year, 20 to 30% growth over the next decade or so for data-driven roles. The time to typically fill these roles from when the open job rec is created to the time that job rec gets filled is around less than 2 months. And again, the applications per job are again quite a bit, like around 74. So there is a little bit of competition, but it's one thing that I have noticed is that it's you need to do a few things very well to stand out significantly. And so if you do those few things well, you are able to stand out uh, quite significantly. And I'll try to allude to that again towards the end of the session. So, and this is what I was getting at. So the talent shortage is real. So even if you see that there are lots of job applications to these roles on LinkedIn or Indeed or whichever platform that you may be applying for, in order to find folks who understand what's happening under the hood in terms of how these ML technologies work, what problem they are trying to solve, how to debug them. That type of talent supply is significantly less than the demand across all of these job roles. And these tools like agentic AI, Cursor, GPT, Claude, Code, all of these AI tools are just enhancing the role as opposed to completely replacing it. For example, you may be working on a robotic path planning problem for a warehouse robotic systems like Dematic makes warehouse robotics. Kiva Systems, which was purchased by Amazon, is a part of Amazon Robotics now. They make robotic systems for warehouses. Um, Tesla does the same thing for non-warehouse things, right? They do it for cars. Waymo does the same thing. All of these technology companies essentially are using something like um, AI, but in a very specific domain. For example, they will do path planning, localization, estimation of your robot, which could be a vehicle, a Tesla, a inventory carrying robot, and so on. So my point here is that just because you have Cursor or GPT writing some aspect of the code, a lot of the things that are still require human intervention are like deciding should this be tackled as a path planning problem or an optimization problem? Should this be tackled as a localization problem or an estimation problem? Stuff like that. So domain expertise, and that brings me to this last bullet here, which is the domain expertise and how you are able to use these AI tools to augment your vision, to reinforce your vision, really is the formula for success. So those are the core truths about the market situation. I did mention previously that there's a talent supply gap. So typically you have around 60K jobs associated with these titles, and then you have around 25K uh, uh, individuals qualified as specialized in this particular knowledge. And so there's clearly a strong demand and a relatively lower supply for now. And these roles are supposed to grow at a strong pace in the next decade or so. So typically, if and the definition of all of these roles, like analysts, data scientists, machine learning engineers, they differ slightly across the type of company. For example, if it's like your Meta and Apple and Googles of the world, um, their data org typically are very mature. They have like hundreds of data scientists and machine learning engineers. They value depth of knowledge associated with this one particular type of ML or classical ML type of algorithms, and then how can you like take that algorithm, deploy it at scale, so on and so forth. So it's like a very specialized role, specialized data science, machine learning role, focusing on some niche aspect of their product. So that's like for very large companies with fairly mature teams. So you will have one specific job description, and they would expect you to essentially test a ML model in that specific job description and deploy that end to end, do all of the model checking, monitoring associated with it, and so on. Then you have like these Fortune 50 companies, which are a little bit smaller, I would, or uh, their focus is not only on the tech stack and making and creating newer and newer machine learning models. Maybe they're applying machine learning models to a variety of different sectors like e-commerce or robotics or oil and gas and so on. And so what they value is, of course, a little bit of knowledge about your AI skills, but also a little bit of domain expertise. And so typically they will have analytics lead or data engineers who build their data engineering pipelines, who build their analytics tools, such that maybe in the next 5 years, they will be at a maturity level of some of these companies here. So that's your Fortune 50 companies. Then there are like these high growth startups. So they are very lean startups. They have like one person, like one ML engineer may do a job of a data scientist, an ML engineer, and also a little bit of like product analyst making Grafana dashboards or Power BI dashboards. Speed is something that small companies value. And so as I mentioned, so they need these jack of all trades type of mentality where a person can do a little bit of data science, a little bit of machine learning, and a little bit of dashboarding and so on. And so generally, if you have these AI first companies, their product is very heavily driven by machine learning oriented technologies. They are typically working at the bleeding edge. They really value research, innovation, and the roles that they will be looking for are like applied scientists and machine learning engineers. Something like um, uh, DeepMind, Google DeepMind, OpenAI, or if you have like some um, thinking machines lab, someone from like OpenAI as former CEO or CTO left and started her own company called Thinking Machines Lab. Those are the types of companies which are very AI first, and they would require um, a fairly bleeding edge knowledge in the field and keeping up with the research, what is happening in the field. So the key strategy here is to identify what is your background and what are the strengths that you can bring to the table, and then target those roles. For example, for me, as I mentioned, I come from this thermal engineering, computational science background. And so I spent some time at TikTok learning where they had a fairly mature team of these data engineers and data scientists and machine learning engineers, where I learned some of the tools and the techniques and how to deal with data at scale with massive amounts of data. And then I am focusing currently on these high growth startups where I'm combining my knowledge of thermal engineering, computational science with an AI driven modeling approach. So that's just one example, but maybe you are a biotech domain expert and you know a little bit about data engineering and SQL and uh, dashboarding and Power BI. So maybe something like startups in that space, or even like these bigger companies who are newly starting their data orgs, are something that you may want to consider. So those are the types of questions that I ask myself when I am trying to target the roles. The salary by domain. So as you can see, even for like entry level folks, you have fairly strong salaries for across all of these four roles, right? Like you have for like senior folks with 10 plus years of experience, you can easily cross some fairly cushy salary numbers. And even but I think the job market typically is challenging for early career individuals. But the good news is that, as I mentioned previously, if you do some small amount of things well, you can make yourself stand out very quickly. And once you do that, even for that, the entry level roles, the compensation is quite generous. And so these top tier tech companies, they consistently set the market ceiling, and then the other companies around them in the same ecosystem follow suit, right? So that's something which which is also something that you can consider. So you can look at FAANG plus type of companies, and they are also trying to catch up to the FAANG system. So in a way, these roles typically have that benefit as well. So that's the market outlook so far. So let's really talk in a little bit more detail on what these roles really mean. So for the first, I want to talk about the machine learning engineer role and definition. So as I mentioned, machine learning engineers are responsible for building ML systems that solve a problem using data-driven modeling and scale that in production environments. So typically, the responsibility, for example, for ML engineer would be a company is interested in knowing how to increase their ads spend, and they want to identify which version of the website should they show to the users, um, and based off of which version the ad spending would go on website version A or website version B. And they want to create a model that predicts some maybe, and this is very similar to what happens in a data scientist role also. So if something like they want to create a version A of the website that shows the rankings of the movies being played with model a ranking model A, and version B of the website uses some different ranking model. How should that ranking model work? How should you build that ranking model? Should it be a classical ML model? Should it be a neural network model? Should it be a deep learning model? Once that model is deployed, how do you monitor the model? What if there's distribution shifts? How do you track distribution shifts? How do you evaluate the model? A/B testing is something that I was alluding to with my example here about testing two different versions of the websites with different ranking models, powering the order of movies to click on that you may want to see on those websites. And so there's a lot of optimization, cross collaboration with product and engineering teams, making sure that the model is deployed correctly. So working with software engineers and ML ops folks, and also then working closely with data scientists and machine learning engineers in collaboration as well. So that's the ML engineer role in general. typically the skills that are sought in this particular role is a good high level programming language like Python, a good somewhat low level programming language like C++ or Java is or Golang is a very strong plus. It's not usually needed for pure ML engineer roles, but if you do know these a little bit lower level languages, that is definitely very good. For ML ops type of roles, you want to know containerization technologies like Docker, Kubernetes, ML model monitoring like ML Flow, and so on. For deploying these models in production on cloud like AWS, tools like SageMaker, Google's Vertex AI, Microsoft's Azure ML are some of these cloud ML frameworks that are popular. Um, these days, of course, with the advent of Gen AI, having knowledge about LLM, deep neural networks is something that is highly sought after as well. And typically, with an ML engineer role, a lot of the times, how do you connect all of the things I mentioned, which is like creating a base model in Python, using experiment tracking, like maybe weights and biases or ML flow and stuff like that. How do you deploy that experiment tracked model in SageMaker? And then how do you take all of that and design a system such that this runs in an automated fashion, scales and scales down based on the traffic? Is you don't have to know each and every box here in great amount of detail, but if you know a little bit in a few of these boxes, that's also very, very valuable. So that is the ML engineer skills and the tech stack. Data scientist is something which is very similar, but it focuses more on exploratory data analysis. So essentially, you are hypothesizing new experiments given a particular question. Maybe in the previous example, I said that okay, there's a website, two versions of the website. Website A has movie rankings in one particular order using a neural network model. Website B has movie rankings in some other order using some LLM, let's say. But at that point, the question was already decided for you. The question was that we want to choose two different models for these two different websites. And that's the job of an ML engineer. The job of a data scientist is to come up with that question. The question is to turn data insights into some business decisions. So maybe the question here is given some data analysis, you track metrics associated with users responding a certain way to a particular type of website, or maybe you hypothesize that based on certain communities, one type of ordering of the movies is going to be more beneficial in one region as opposed to this other region. So those are the types of questions backed by statistical testing, backed by some proof of concept modeling, and then communicating those findings to the higher management, collaborating with product and program managers to identify which ideas are worth pursuing. All of those ideas are something that data scientists have it typically involves in the role of a data scientist. So they typically spread themselves across the breadth to identify which is a technical direction using data-driven modeling that a company can take to drive business decisions. And once they have identified a direction and a model, the ML engineers typically take that, convert that model into production code, unit test it, integrate that model into the production pipeline, and so on. So as you can see, there's a small amount of overlap in between those two roles. Some mature companies have very dedicated data scientists who only focus on identifying the right question. Some smaller companies have a little bit of overlap. Uh, Typically, as I mentioned again, the tech stack is a high-level coding language, some high-level ML libraries like scikit-learn, PyTorch, TensorFlow, Keras, stuff like that. SQL for data engineering and just querying the data, which is already set by the data engineers in your databases. some statistical and machine learning knowledge, and then AWS, GCP, or Microsoft Azure for some ML infra. Just not setting it up from grounds up, but just being able to use it. Um, so that's the tech stack. Finally, there's the data engineer, which essentially, as I mentioned, they are responsible for building the infrastructure for the data to be stored in either relational or non-relational databases. So they'll be focusing on actually taking the data from the front end and storing them on the back end. So they are responsible for designing those data pipelines where their data jobs run, let's say, every day and stores the data in the tables. They decide on the schemas associated with the tables, which table should store what information, how should the two tables be related, how should the two tables be joined. Typically, data scientists and data engineers work fairly closely. Data scientists may have a question, I need data X for analysis. Typically, data engineers would know exactly which table, what format the data would be available in. Sometimes the data tables get too large. How can you make your queries run faster? That is also typically a data engineer's job. And typically they are the ones on who are also responsible for on-call support. So if for some reason if your system breaks, then the data engineers are supposed to keep a track of how to fix it. Um, a lot of their work is around advanced SQL query optimization, setting up Apache Spark frameworks, using cloud platforms, setting up data warehouses, dealing with like Kafka and RabbitMQ or other message queues for some real-time streaming data, and identifying a lot of these high-level design patterns, high-level system design patterns that should that should follow given a certain data stream that is coming in and you want to store the data stream. So, and finally, we have the data analyst role, which again is using the stuff set up by data engineers in these data tables and just using the querying for not writing a production database, but rather using these SQL queries for generating insights and creating ad hoc business analysis. For example, if I want to know how many users logged into my website um, on an average per month for the last 10 years. That's a question typically for a data analyst. And maybe I want to like create some dashboarding to report information like this. I want to create a certain metric like number of users per day, number of users on the weekend, create those key performance indicators or KPIs and create reporting around it and understand the needs of the business and give support to the business in terms of their data requirements. So that's essentially the role of a data analyst. As I mentioned, the skills revolve around knowing a relational database language like SQL, dashboarding like Tableau or Power BI. Communication is a big part in almost all of these roles, but specifically for data scientists and even data analysts, a good part of the job also requires creating dashboarding. So having this um, not inherent, but having a practiced ability to create visual insights from data is something which is very valuable. And again, thinking critically about a problem. So if you are given a data, how can you essentially show maybe the business has asked a vague question? Can you essentially maneuver the data in a way such that that answers the question that the business has asked? So having that problem framing aspect to it is also something that is very valuable. So those are the broad level roles that I wanted to talk about and what each of them entail. And then next, I want to talk about how typically these interview processes go. So for like your again, all of these interview processes for these roles differ by the company size. So, for example, if you are a FAANG plus company where essentially you already have data mature teams, they will want to focus a little bit more on like some specific algorithm, specific depth on a particular uh, on a particular subtopic within the ML AI ecosystem. They would try to look for a certain domain fit. For example, let's say if you want to work for, or if you're applying for an e-commerce company, maybe they would want to know your previous experience in e-commerce. Maybe they would want to know a little bit on some specific algorithms, machine learning or otherwise that you have used to solve an e-commerce problem. So that's essentially what they would look for. Typically, these FANG Plus companies will have a lot more rounds, coding, system design from an ML or data science perspective, behavioral. They have some a little bit longer timelines, but these days, if in the ML AI space, if you are available, companies tend to move fast. Um, and the hiring bar tends to be high, not because of the difficulty, but just because of the scope of knowledge. For example, you would need to know a little bit about probability and statistics and coding and a little bit of machine learning and also system design associated with all of these things. And so having a a good amount of mastery on some of these things just takes time. It's not about difficulty, but it's just about sitting with the content in a systematic manner for a certain amount of time so that you have mastered it well. For Fortune 50 companies, which are slightly outside of this FANG territory, focus more on, let's say, a particular domain. For example, what I was talking about in this warehouse robotics thing, right? So maybe you are working on a warehouse robotics system. They would typically focus more on how you can solve problems which are somewhat related to them or tangentially even related to their use case. They have a similar timeline as FANG companies because they're also big companies in general. And the emphasis is not on building these new algorithms or new tools. The emphasis is on building, using the tools or the algorithms built by these FANG companies for their business use case. And um, because the emphasis is on using the algorithms built by the outside community for their use case, communicating the high level technical content to non-technical folks becomes very important because you in a way have to sell your decision, like why should you be using an LLM, why should the problem be solved with an LLM, can you solve the problem without an LLM, why is machine learning required here. Those are the types of questions that you may want to like sell your work on to the higher management to get the buy-in from the stakeholders. And finally, we have startups where essentially the focus, again, as I mentioned, is delivering with versatility, with speed, and they're versatile. Typically, the rounds are fewer than larger companies, and the response time is also very fast. And you need to have a generalist mindset, which is that you may not want to focus only on this very specific high level statistical algorithm, but rather you should be focusing on how to take this algorithm, which was developed by someone at a university, in academia, or in the industry, and use it for their particular use case. So again, over specialization is not valued that much for a very for a small startup, but if you have specialization and also a broad set of things that you can show, that is something that really sets you apart. um, Typically the types of interviews for almost all of these roles will have some sort of flavor like so. Typically, you will have behavioral interviews which focus on questions like, tell me about a time that you had a disagreement with your manager and how did you deal with it? Tell me about a time when you had to move the deadlines because you realized that the project would take longer than usual. Stuff like that. There are case studies. So for data science interviews, especially, you will have case studies like, we see that our data is reporting, our model is reporting accuracy metric, which is consistently degrading over time, or precision and recall curve is degrading over time. Why is that happening? Typically, they would also give you sometimes a take-home exercise. So they would give you like a data set or an Excel file and ask you to do exploratory data analysis, answer a particular question, and then present the results back to them. Um, if it's a data engineering or product analyst heavy role, typically it would involve writing some SQL type of a code to get some data insights from your tables. If it's a ML engineer role, they have, again, as I mentioned, system design questions. And finally, and system design here talks about like which are the high level infrastructure that you would choose. For example, if you have a if you have an image processing model, okay, you have data stored in these tables. You take those images, you deploy this model on top of that image, you segment that image into you use an image segmenting algorithm, and after you segment the image, you store those segmented data back into your database and then do some downstream processing associated with that. How would that entire pipeline look like? That is the system design type of question that ML engineers or sometimes data scientists even face. And finally, there's a cultural fit. So, is your long-term career goal in somewhat alignment with the position? So, typically, going in a little bit more detail, the data scientist or ML engineer interview process looks as follows. Again, it might differ slightly from company to company, but you have a statistics and probability round where they assess the fundamentals of your statistical knowledge around like hypothesis testing, distributions, and so on, and then probabilistic knowledge, some practical SQL and coding. So very similar to the data engineering roles. You will have some ML case studies. So design a recommendation system for a movie ranking review, and then experiment design, which essentially talks stuff like A/B testing, metrics selection, and so on, or a take-home project. So I typically it's like 3 or 4 amongst these 5 things is what I've seen at most companies, and at startups typically it's around 3. But that's really the um, the role and the process. For data engineering roles, which focus more on setting up the systems which are used by data analysts or business analysts. Typically, the round again focuses more on database languages like SQL and system design associated with that. How would you then do the data modeling and the pipeline design using some of the tools available out there? The coding algorithms, which focus a little bit more on just general coding ability as opposed to focusing on hardcore data structures and algorithms. So it's a little bit less focused on like the SWE type of coding, or maybe the way sometimes I've seen it done is that for L5 level position, SWE, the same company might ask questions in coding for L3 position for a L5 level data engineer, stuff like that. So they essentially ask questions which test your coding ability at a slightly lower level, because the focus here is more on like database design, relational modeling, relational database modeling, and so on. And then finally, you have the behavioral and take-home project also sometimes. So that's your data engineer process. And then you have your data analyst interview process. So this one, what I have seen is, again, you have a SQL round where essentially you are given a table and some schema associated with the table, and you are supposed to write a SQL query, left join, right join, some filtering, aggregations, and so on. You typically then have a case study where you talk through your reasoning, your hypothesis on why certain things could have happened. You have a product sense round. So in general, like how would you improve the product? How would you suggest experimentation for adding a new feature to the product? And then finally, you also have this uh, leadership qualities interview or conversation about how to um, how to collaborate with different stakeholders, which are working on different aspects of the same product. So you have a stakeholder interview as well. Typically, these interviews, the way they happen is data analysts work with a variety of different teams. So maybe the team that you are interviewing with, or the team that you are your potential future team might have folks do the round number 1, 2, and 3, and then round number 4 might be from someone who is not in your team but in a sister team. So that sister team might be your stakeholder, for example. And so they will again do a similar behavioral round or even like semi-technical round to gauge how you would collaborate with them. Um, and in some cases, you can replace round 2 or round 3 with like this take home and so on. So as I said, a lot of these roles have a significant amount of overlap in them in a way. Um, for I broadly talked about SQL, some data structures coding or normal Python coding, some stats ML knowledge, some system design knowledge, behavioral and product sense, right? One thing that I want to like point out is the last bullet here, which is the behavioral one. For entry level positions, it's okay, but even for like 2 years or 2 years plus experience, your behavioral interviews start mattering more and more, because your behavioral interviews teach or show the interviewer a lot about your communication style, your ability to think on the spot, your ability to collaborate, your vision, your values. A lot of those things are communicated in this behavioral section. So it's really important across all the different roles. Um, then for data analysts and data engineers, as you may imagine, SQL is something which is their bread and butter. Data scientists use SQL to mainly just pull the data and then do some more experimentation on it. And finally, the ML engineer is not focused more on SQL, but they just use it to occasionally debug the model. Coding, again, data analysts, as I mentioned previously, they are only tested for basic coding ability. But all of the three remaining positions, it's just a varying degree of depth that you require for coding. Stats or machine learning knowledge. Data analysts and data engineers they don't need to know the deep algorithmic nuts and bolts associated with each and every algorithm, but for the ML engineer and data scientist, they do become important. And for system design, they are mainly relevant for like senior level roles, and they are mainly for data scientists, ML engineers, and data engineers. Data analysts, typically, if the work is downstream of all of this data which has already been populated in the tables, and then take that data and produce dashboarding, visualizations, communications, system design becomes less relevant in that sense. But because system design is less relevant, then product sense is something that becomes more important for data analysts and data scientists. On the other hand, the data engineer and ML engineer are a little bit removed from the product. So that's my experience so far working with pretty much data engineers, data scientists, being a machine learning engineer, and applied scientist myself, on how I've seen this matrix play out in startups as well as uh, uh, big FAANG or FAANG plus companies. So right, and so as I mentioned, some of the ways to really stand out is to do I'm saying a little bit, I don't want to say contradictory things, but I keep saying do small amount of things well, but at the same time, I'm claiming that there's a lot of different things that you need to know for something like a data scientist or machine learning engineer role, which is probability, statistics, data structures, Python, and so on. But I still maintain that if you are systematic about your preparation and spend a good half a year or 8 months on tackling these topics one by one, doing these small amount of things well and in a little bit of depth takes you very, very far. And so with that being said, what are some of the behavioral interview green flags? So if you are able to address very upfront about some of the mistakes that you made in your decisions and what lessons you learned. If you can show your collaborative teamwork, if you are able to ask thoughtful questions at the end of the interview, if you can demonstrate that if you don't know something, you are eager to learn that new technology, that shows a green flag when it comes. Just if you are able to show that you are a good person to work with, that's a behavioral interview green flag. Technical green flags are, again, you can explain your past projects in depth instead of saying, "Oh, I deployed this ML model because someone told me to." That doesn't show ownership. But if in fact you can say, I deployed this machine learning model because we found that a non-ML model was actually underperforming based on this particular metric. I identified that using machine learning, I could improve the prediction performance by X%, and as a result, the business cost was saved by Y dollars, so on and so forth. If you are able to defend your decisions like that, that's like a technical green flag. If you are able to talk a little bit about what that ML model is doing under the hood, that's even better. And in a way, that translates to communication also, right? So if you are able to quickly lay out your answer in this star format. Are people familiar here with the star format, which is this whenever you're asked a question, behavioral or otherwise, you should always formulate your answer in a star format, STAR, which is situation, task, answers, situation, task, action, and results. So if someone asks you, I want to improve the or reduce the cost of transportation for my company. What should I do? So then the situation here is, okay, the company has higher transportation costs. They want to reduce it. So the task is to identify opportunities, maybe in their trucking, maybe the cost of gas, and so on and so forth. The action is maybe you build a transportation model, path planning model, route planning model, and so on. And then the result is how you actually improve the how the model perform. So you see how I laid this thing out. You should always lay out your answers in this star format. So if you don't remember anything from today's talk, just remember star, because that really does set you apart very easily. So how is AI now changing all of these roles? So I think most of these organizations in data analysts, business analysts, data scientists, machine learning scientists, uh, all of these roles use AI in their day-to-day work. Organizations are reporting how AI is improving their coding speed and proficiency and how many lines of code is written by AI and so on. Organizations are also reporting that they are deploying AI agents and reporting these high-level impacts on their bottom line and financial reporting as well, right? Because of AI. So as a result of that, AI skills are now almost expected. You have seen a strong increase in AI job postings in 2025. For jobs like AI engineer, there's a very, very strong growth. And then even though if you guys saw, like, I know the government shut down in the US for the last few months, so the job report didn't come out, but I'm a job report nerd and I'm waiting for the September report, which is due to come out this Friday. Or it must have come out today. But that job report specifically mentions that even if like the US economy is, and the job situation is not so great, for AI related jobs, which is actually fairly good. So these are the jobs which are actually are increasing. And so typically what they expect is something which is only helping us do our jobs better and faster, which is familiarity with cloud code, GPT, and willing to learn and experiment with it, as opposed to being averse to even touching it. And then if you already have experience with like fine tuning LLMs, building RAG applications, and some specialized skills, that's even better. Typically, machine learning, as I said, we talked about this broad 4 job roles: ML, DS, data engineering, data science analysts, and AI is used pretty much across all of these four roles. So for ML and data science, typically it automates your model training, it accelerates your exploratory data analysis. For ML, it scales, and you can identify which parts of the data pipeline or the feature pipeline are lacking. For data science, you can create these automated data insights and narratives from complex code or data that you have already gathered in a notebook. For data engineering, again, the same thing. AI can help you orchestrate and monitor some complex data pipelines that you have written end to end. It can help you enhance some reliability frameworks within your pipelines. It can help you set up reliability framework for data analysis roles. It can also enable you to come up with quick explainable summaries and recommendations based on your dashboarding and so on. So AI typically is transforming each of these roles in how they are and their job descriptions. So these are some of the roles which are emerging in the last couple of years. So in the traditional data analyst role, as I mentioned, typically it was very heavily oriented on SQL and dashboarding. Now sometimes those data analyst roles will also ask about Gen AI experience. So how are you able to leverage Gen AI to create visualizations, to create data pipelines, to gather domain insights, and so on. LLM engineer is, of course, responsible for deploying large language models, fine-tuning them, deploying RAG-based systems. Prompt engineering is something which focuses a little bit less on the coding aspect of it, but just focusing more on using the LLM as is, but crafting prompts like zero-shot prompting, few-shot prompting, chain of thought prompting, tree of thought prompting, React framework, which is this reasoning plus action framework through prompts. So stuff like that. You should if you know prompt engineering topic from a little bit more academic perspective, that is something that is also a popular role. You have ML ops engineer, which did exist previously before the Gen AI revolution, but these days ML ops engineers are also expected to know how to embed LLM deployment in the pipeline. And then analytics translator. So essentially there's a lot of gaps in traditional companies where they have a lot of data, but they don't know how to effectively deploy AI tools on top of that data. And so those are some of the roles that are emerging. And one thing that I have in my experience so far that I've seen is that really helps your career in terms of making yourself more marketable is having a certain domain expertise. So as AI is doing much of, let's say, the low level coding, if you have one, communication, two, something that I was talking about in my personal experience, right, which is this thermal engineering, energy sciences background, and augment that with AI. So if you have a certain domain expertise, like e-commerce or supply chain or transportation or finance or healthcare, that is something which the the AI cannot tell itself what to ask, or what the AI cannot yet prompt itself on what the prompt should be. It still needs a fairly strong spoon feeding, if I may, to to uh, give you reasonable responses. So domain expertise is one. Problem framing. So again, it goes in that realm of what should be the question that we should ask to the AI. Uh, Moving beyond this correlation, but rather asking the what if questions. That is something that is or critical thinking, if you will, is valued. Communication, again, as I mentioned, in the first place, and then ethics. So if you know, if you can detect bias in AI, or if you can detect prompts which lead to biased responses or create frameworks for evaluating bias, um, that's that's uh, that's that is also something which is very heavily useful. So that brings me to the that was the part that I wanted to cover mainly. That, and next I want to cover the mock interviews. Rohan,
Yeah,
is
here's Surit. Thank you so much
yeah.
for walking folks through this so far. If you could move to the next slide, I'll just very quickly set context for the folks who've just tuned in for the first time. Yeah, so folks, what we'll do is we'll take up two questions, considering how where we are at with regards to the time. What we'll do is we'll display a first question on the screen. Post that, Suhred will briefly explain the problem statement, high-level constraints, high-level scoping related things. Then we would want you to attempt it live. So please raise your hand. We'll randomly pick anybody once live. Please give a brief introduction about yourself, your career background, and then take a stab at it and see how it goes. And after you have attempted, we'll see what Suhrid has to say about the right answer is not the right way to, so the ideal answer or the better way to answer it, if at all. And if there's any feedback, he'd be happy to give you that. So we can move to the next question. First question, rather.
Oh, okay. So question number one, risk and fraud model over blocking. So our scenario is this, that our B2C subscriptions, so business to customer company, uh, your payment risk model decides whether to approve, step up, or decline renewal transactions. Offline looked strong, but after 3 months, you see rising complaints. Legit renewals are declined, churn up, uh, so the churn is up. So basically people leaving the platform or the credit card application, and then the CS tickets, customer service tickets are going up. So the scenario, to my understanding, is the following: is that you have a uh, payment risk model. Think if you are a credit card company or a loan approval company that decides if a particular person should get a loan, step up for more checking, or just decline the renewal application. And then because of that model, you are having that model is over blocking the approvals or renewals, and the prompt is what could be happening, how would you diagnose this and fix this. um, Typically, these are the questions which would be asked in a data science MLE or a data engineering. For a data engineering, the way the question would be asked is how would you support, or what type of data would be required to answer a question like this. This is more aligned with the data science MLE job roles, and typically what they seek in an answer is how would you frame the problem? What model would you use to first model this payment risk thing, and then how would you debug the model, and then how would you monitor this model? So that's the question. Does anybody want to take a stab at it?
I'll just scout through the attendee section. Folks, anybody who wants to take a stab at it, please raise your hand. We'll be happy to take you live. I think there was very good interactions we had in the first session today so far. Would love for you to raise your hand, take a stab at it, and I think to think of it as like yeah, Yannick, somebody have raised. I may be pronouncing your name incorrectly, so I'll refrain from. So you can take a stab at it, man. I've like unmuted you. Give us a brief introduction about who you are, what your background is, and then uh, go live with it. Sure.
Yeah, so I'm Yannick. I think I was on call with you yesterday or team. I'm based in Canada and I'm looking to get a job in the US. That's why I'm here in the program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm an AI engineer and looking to move as an AI engineer over there in the US also.
Got it. Yannick, would you want to try this question?
Yes. So I
Yeah,
think
sure.
for this type of scenarios, what we can check is having a model which are trying to classify either a payment risk is approve, step up, or decline. So we can start with within a very simple model like a decision tree first, and then having the output of the classification as a category like approve, step up, or decline, and based on that, we will do the classification. Um, but one moment of okay, but once once uh, once we have once we have that type of what we can have as an issue here can be either data drift, because maybe the distribution probability distribution of the data change, so that the model doesn't fit anymore to output the right approve, step up, or decline, so that um, we can have like many false positive in the data. So what we can do here is to retrain our model based on the new data that we have,
Mm.
and in order to put on production the model, we can have kind of a challenger and champion way of deploying the model. So we will have the champion, which is the current one, and the challenger trained, let's say, based on some of the traffic of what we have, let's say 80% or 60% first. And once we have the challenger outperforming the champion, we can drift, and we can move to use the challenger as a main model.
Mm. Okay, yeah, that could work. So, um, the way I think so you identified some good aspects on setting up this challenger model, looking at this previous model. I think that was good. The way I would first try to set up your same answer. There is no correct answer in these questions. They are just looking for your communication and how you tackle a question like this. But as I mentioned previously, one thing that I want all of you to take away from this talk is STAR, right? STAR method. Forget everything I said, just remember STAR. STAR is situation, task, action, result. And so, given this question, the way I would start my answer is something like, okay, so the situation here is that our model over predicts. So it basically is increasing the false positive rate, right? So our model falsely declares that the renewal transactions are not to be renewed, and therefore the customer churn is up. And so the situation is that the false positive rate is going high. The task, therefore, is for us to set up a model monitoring framework to detect model drift, to detect if the features have if there's a feature drift. That's our task. the action that I would want to take is set up model monitoring frameworks like MLflow, data, weights and biases, and so on. And then the result is you would want to have this model metrics tracking dashboard to identify model drifts and so on. So that is how I would try to set up the answer that you previously gave, and essentially try to fit the points that you made into this like situation, task, action, and result framework. So more specifically, the way I would want to look at this particular question is mention something about, because your risk or fraud model is overblocking the approvals, your false positive rate is increasing. Because your false positive rate is increasing, I would push back on accuracy. The model accuracy is not the metric that we should be looking at here. The metric that we should be looking at is what they call precision, right? Because precision is related to false positive rate. And because false positive is increasing, your precision is decreasing. And so what could that mean? That could mean that the historical data that the model is trained on may have mixed, your features may have drifted. The historical data that you trained on maybe had a selection bias because you trained the model only on data which was um, um, which was trained on good examples, quote unquote, where the loan was only approved, and so it didn't have enough negative examples. So even a slightly deviated example, the model would reject that. The You may have train and test model skew, where essentially your train test split was very uneven. Those are some of the issues that can cause your precision recall curve to move. And so the way I would essentially navigate the situation is overblocking is or this increase in false positive rate is usually a threshold or a calibration or a feedback loop issue, not a bad model in itself. And so I would stop the bleeding with recalibration and diagnose the drift and label bias, and then retrain with more recent data, and then safely roll out the model with more model monitoring and guardrails in place. So that's how I would structure the answer to this one.
Thanks, Yannick, for taking a stab. I really appreciate it. So we can move to the next question. I think while you're addressed it, maybe share the screen. People, if they want to take a screen grab, they can.
Oh, yeah. So I think, yeah, so this is essentially what we said, right? Like reframe the metrics to precision and recall. Look at the model drift. Look at this train test. If the training data is missing some categories, missing some values, and then recalibrate with some recent data, and then also do model monitoring and set up model monitoring and techniques. Okay. Your next question is your MAU, which stands for monthly active users, dropped 15% month over month. You have 30 minutes to communicate this issue to the execs. So the scenario is that your exec dashboard shows that your monthly active users is down by 15% month over month. You have 30 minutes before a leadership meeting. Recent events, a new app has been released. A paywall test is ongoing in 2 regions, and there was a short outage. And so the question is, what do you do in 30 minutes and what do you present? This is typically, as you can imagine, for data analyst, business analyst, or data scientist roles, sometimes even data engineering. And what they're testing for again is, can you set up the metrics? Can you set up segmentation? Can you identify how to break the model, how to break the data, how to aggregate the data, how to like set up your responses? And again, remember star. Forget everything what I said. Just remember star.
I think this is something that we often like observe here as well. While people may have like a great technical expertise, at the start, the format in which they communicate, things get like really diluted. We already have Pooja who is volunteering to address it. Pooja, I'll be allowing you to talk. Like I said, like give us a brief intro about yourself and take a stab at it. Yeah.
Um, so
Hey.
my, so I Hello. So I'm Pooja, and I work at telecom company and T-Mobile for as a product manager, program manager, and I will try to take a stab at it. I'm in the AI/ML program of Interview Kickstart, which is really great. So in this, the situation I was faced with that I had only 30 minutes to present to my execs, and the dashboard itself is telling it was telling the story that MAU has dropped 15% month to month, and it had like we recently released a new app and the paywall test in the two regions, and there was a short outage. So I had a just 30-minute time, and I have to present. I have to come up with an idea what value and ROI we have delivered with this new launch, and how to give good news along with this news sandwiched that MAU is down. But the most focus is like what the metric stories are saying, what are the trends, what is the how the segmentation is happening, and how along with the cohort partitioning, how I can say that what is happening in the and as a cluster, where the trend is reaching to, there is a dip, but how it's going to go up, and what are the steps we are taking, what is as a situation and why it has happened, and how we are attacking and which regions. And these are just the two regions. What's the story from other regions, and because of the shortage, what happened, and what are the next actions, clear actions, what is needed by when. So I will, and we were able to, like, I was able to turn and convince them in that, I should be able to like convince that this is where we are, and these are the reasons why we will be succeeding despite this dip. And even if in the shorter term this dip exists, what are the course correction we are taking, how we are training the model, the clusters and all, and how we are going to play with our data and all. What is the topmost priority? And I will ask, like, we need support. We are lacking some of the resources, the data engineers. So if we can borrow from Tiger team and just pack it, and need we will need some LLMs fund and something like that. Yeah, thank you. To turn it around, and the impact we will be bringing with this whole thing is that I'm foreseeing how within a month within a month and two, what is a step to bring back will become 0%, and then we will have the upward trend with reasoning.
Thanks, Pooja, for addressing that. Suraj, over to you for the explanation and the feedback part.
Yeah, so I think again, I think you followed the star format well. I think that was a win in itself, and I think you identified good use cases of how you would essentially investigate the problem. You brought in an LLM at the end. The way I would typically try to answer this question is as follows. So again, I would mention by identifying the situation, and then the task is essentially to identify what caused this drop in MAU, and then I would go a little bit more into the action, right? The action that maybe I will take is to do some high level cuts across the data, maybe identify if it's a iOS versus Android problem, if it's a geography problem, so like filter the data based on platform, filter the data based on geography, filter the data based on user type. Is it like some new user, returning user, reactivated user, and formulate some hypothesis. So maybe the hypothesis is that new app release that or the new paywall thing that they had going caused engagement to drop. And then based off of this, I would essentially, or my another hypothesis is that the outage caused a temporary drop. The third hypothesis may be that the paywall test reduced reactivation. And I would be able to prove all of these things using my data segmentation or data filtration based on the platform or the version, based on the geography, because that would enable me to identify the regions with paywall test, regions without paywall test, and compare metrics across those two dimensions. Compare the user type, new versus returning users, and compare the timeline of the app as well. So when was the app released and when was the outage window? And then based off of all of these four dimensions, I can calculate the metrics. So that would be the action that I would take, and the result finally would be based off of the metrics on each of these filtered dimensions, or metrics within each of these subsections of the data. I may be able to better make a granular claim about why the MAU is decreasing. So that's how I would go for this, but I think your answer did have some elements of this.
Would you want
Um,
to? How much time do we have left?
yeah, we have, I think we are just at time. Do
We are just
you?
at time. Hence, I'm saying if you have a section left also, and would you want to take one more question? I think that would in total add around like 10 minutes odd.
Yeah, so I think
I think we can
let's
take one
take,
behavioral question if it's okay, like
yeah,
with the
let's do a
data thing.
behavioral one.
Yeah.
So tell me about a time when your analysis or project didn't deliver the expected results. How did you handle it?
I think I already see somebody raising their hand. By the way, one fun fact, Pooja, I think is already part of her alumni. She was just mentioning how IK support team has helped her in terms of structuring her answers so far. So maybe that's where you saw the whole star approach coming up, Surit. Coming to the person who's raising his hand, I'm sorry, may not be able to pronounce your name correctly, but feel free to take a stab at it.
Hey, I'm Vani.
Can you?
Can you hear me?
Hey, we can hear you loud and clear.
Hey, I'm Vani, and I'm a data engineer. I was wondering, if we are gonna go through a mock question for data engineering role.
This is a behavioral question that we have or live on stream.
Sorry?
Or I'm saying there's one question live on screen, which is a behavioral question.
Uh-huh.
Would you want to take a stab at this one, or we have other questions in
No,
our
no. I was wondering if we are having any mocks for data engineering.
so do you have any question for data engineers specifically, like which focus on the core expertise?
Typically, there's a not data engineer, but this is also very close to data engineering roles where they are asking for um, SQL analysis associated with the data table. But I thought because we were running short of time,
Yeah, sure. Sure, no
I
worries.
wanted
No,
I wanted to take the behavioral one because that's common to everything.
sure.
So would you want to start try it out? This one or the SQL one?
Does anybody want to try any one of the question out?
I think I'm seeing Praneeth. Praneeth, I'm taking you live.
Hi, my name is Praneeth. I'm a BI engineer, somewhere lying in between data engineers and data analyst. I have 17 years of experience in the same stream. Looking forward to learn AI and become an AI engineer. But yeah, coming to this behavioral question, tell me about the time when you have analysis project and deliver the expected results. So the normally I would take risk analysis of methods what I have in mind and do a which risk has the revert most the most lower risk, or something which I can roll it back very soon. Based on that lowest risk possibility, I'll take an action. I have to calculate two things here: risk, how much risk I'm going to take, if is it reversible or not. These two factors I'll try to calculate and try with the one which is least code change if possible. And if that works out with all the results which we are expecting, then we'll go with that. Otherwise, we'll go with the higher cost which has lower risk. That's how I would do.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Again, so what I would I think your answers are had all the right elements to it. The way again I would frame this answer is something around like describing a situation, then describing the task, then describing the action, and then like the result associated with this action. So if the question, for example, was tell me about a time when your analysis or project didn't deliver the results, so maybe the situation can be the situation was that I was developing a transportation model, and then the analysis showed that my optimization model didn't deliver the results that expected. So the task that I took upon myself was to identify some flaws in my model and try to see where that model really went wrong. So in the action maybe that I took was to was to identify all the model inputs that are a function that contribute to the transportation cost, and maybe I missed a few inputs, maybe my input was outdated, and so or the cost structure had changed over time when the model was in deployment, and as a result of that the results weren't as per expectation. And then um, the way I handled that was essentially I updated the inputs based on the new cost rate, the new cost structure, and then the model results aligned with the previous expectation. So you see how like this I said something about the situation, I said something about the task, what went wrong, I said something about the action, how I like corrected my wrong, and then the final outcome. So typically, whenever question what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, typically the ask is not to get defensive, but rather to show ownership and not take blame. So just take ownership for the responsibility and focus on what you did better to correct the action. Emphasize what you learned and quantify the impact for some concrete evidence, and then you should again keep it each of these answers keep them concise. So that also shows like that you can focus on the most important parts. And these are just some additional questions that are typically asked in these roles. So bias variance trade-off, how do you handle a situation where your ML model fails in production? Feature engineering for data scientists, typically they are focusing on data analysis. How to build a perfect model versus delivering quick insights. For data engineer, it's focusing on some Spark data jobs and optimizing ETL pipelines, optimizing data warehousing and processes. For data analysis, they typically talk about dashboarding, how to present contradictory findings, how to determine which metrics matter the most when there's like thousands of KPIs to track, and so on. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about H1B. Again, as I mentioned, I came from an H1B background. So typically H1Bs are dominated by the tech industries. And so a lot of these companies are familiar with what the system look like to apply for H1B visas. Big tech companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Netflix, Meta, all of these big players are very familiar with the system, as you can tell by the numbers. There is some lottery, so there's a little bit of luck that plays into the game, where you have like these 30% selection rate, random selection rate, if you will. But they are making some policy updates to the H1B program. So essentially, they have more clearer specialty occupation definition for H1B. So that just makes your application in case once it's picked up, the makes the post processing of your application smoother. So that's that's in a way good for the program. And typically, it also provides broad access. So um, uh, generally, a lot of the employers got at least one new H-1Bs, and more than 50% went to employers with like less than 15 approvals. So typically, there's again, as I the long story short here is that big tech players, some of the smaller companies also are very familiar with the H-1B program, and they are fairly well versed with the nuances of the program. So as long as you're willing to work with them, with their legal team, it should be it's not as bad as sometimes they make it out to be. Uh, so sometimes the career levers that are in, so H-1B, the lottery is not something that is in your hands completely, but something that you can control is upskilling. So you can target some in-demand skills. You can target AI upskilling. You can build your portfolio. You can talk to your friends in these companies. You can essentially have a interview prep. Again, as I mentioned, this STAR is something that you should remember from today's talk, if not anything. So these are some of the things that are within your control. And finally, just a note on H-1B. Like H-1B is just one type of visa. There are also other visas, like O-1 visa is another one, uh, uh, which doesn't have a lottery system. It does require a specialization. So the application is a little bit more tedious, but there's no lottery. So O1 is something that is also an option. And I think this was covered in the previous talk as well. So typically, if in the event of a layoff, typically you confirm your last day, collect your like I-797s and pay stubs. Um, don't panic. I think take some time to process it and then start interviewing. Beginning after you refresh your resume, refresh your LinkedIn, start applying in batches on LinkedIn, and then start setting up interviews. And then as I mentioned, just have your previous docs ready with the pay stubs and I-797s just to maintain your status. Here are some of the myths versus the reality. Again, we see the news that, oh, no one is sponsoring the H-1Bs now, but in reality, we are seeing record number of filings at even until last year. So there are some companies which are not sponsoring, but there's still a lot of companies which are sponsoring. You don't need to leave immediately after a layoff. You have a 60-day grace period. And in fact, even after the 60-day grace period, you have options to convert your visa to a tourist visa or something to like at least maintain your status. So there are some options. Finally, or not finally, but then another is transfers are too risky. It's I have transferred from big companies to small companies, and from small companies back to big companies on H-1B. If you are well prepared, if your documentation is in line, it's usually okay. Lottery system is rigged. They have modified the process a little bit such that if your qualifications are in these specialized skill set, you have a higher chance. They have two draws now. Earlier, they had only one draw, I think, when I was applying. So that obviously improves your chances. H-1Bs are cheap labor. Again, a lot of these high-paying tech jobs, we saw the salary, they are not supposed to discriminate based on, you don't even have to explain the visa status during the salary negotiation phase. I understand that it causes stress because you are not in the mind frame to negotiate as much, but even then, your base salaries for even entry level positions are quite lucrative. And with that, that's really all that I wanted to cover today. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you so much, Surit. For just sharing, we have the management session lined up tomorrow. Along with that, there will be the EMA with the complete panel. So do tune in for that. We have noted a lot of questions have come in, Surit. A lot of questions related to data, AI, ML domain have come in. We can address some today, or I can like create a repository of all these, and then we can address all of these tomorrow as well. What would you prefer?
Let's do it tomorrow so that I have like some. If you can
Yeah.
share those questions
I
with
will
me, then I
happily.
can prepare and then.
I will do that. I'll do that. I'll just take the dump out of from the Zoom and just share it with you and the other panelists as well. So, folks, do tune in tomorrow at same time. I would look forward to seeing you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.